Hey guys. This is part 8 of What If Naruto Was Banished to Unknown Lands. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 31, New Directions. Naruto sat perched on top of the White Tower, the huge crystal that Guerrera had installed shimmering behind him. He'd come to call this his spot. If ever someone was looking for him, chances were he was to be found here. He loved this spot for several reasons. To the left he could see the general training field. He saw the figures of Nagi, Calamity, and the newest apprentice Kenichi training under the guidance of Nuik. It had been a blow to Naruto learning of Nagi's loss of limb, but the smile and determination of his friend to learn a new technique, and somehow replace it, took the edge off the pain. Naruto had watched with admiration for weeks now as Nagi was put through the paces by Nuik in an effort to draw out this power within him. To the right, Naruto saw the academy training field. As the population of Tengaku grew, the ranks of those wanting to defend it swelled. There had been a massive influx of peaceful merchants and shopkeepers who had asked to learn to defend their new home. The Council of Elders had decided to offer training to any citizen who was interested. Naruto could count on his hands the number of citizens who were not partaking. The fields were full of activity, both younger and older generations learning different martial arts. But despite that, Naruto had never seen anything more peaceful. His last reason for loving this spot finally appeared. The sign to the new Ichiraku ramen shop was flipped to open and the smell of fresh noodles wafted up to him. With a grin he leapt from the great height, soaring to the ground below. Breakfast was ready. Morning, Naruto. Ichiraku smiled as he slid the customary large bowl of chicken ramen to his favorite customer. Good morning. Naruto beamed back. He snapped his chopsticks together gleefully and dug in with a shout of databayo. A slow trickle of morning customers entered the restaurant. Since opening in the premier spot that Naruto had given him, Ichiraku had flourished. The dynamic of Tengaku was different from other villages. Normally such a gift would have shown that Ichiraku was favored and other merchants would have either plotted against him or used his standing with the Tenshikage for advantage. Here, everyone and anyone could talk to Naruto whenever they wished. If not directly, then to any one of the many Naruto clones still puttering. There was no need for machinations here. As such, the people judged that the great spot that Naruto had given this noodle stand just meant that the noodles were fantastic, and they tried it and were not disappointed. Guerrera and his daughter Gabriella came in and sat down at their normal table, waving with a smile at Naruto. Gabriella giggled and began playing with the napkins on the table. Naruto focused on his meal, and the problem that he'd been dwelling on since his return to Tengaku. The immortal titan Lucius had given Naruto a lot to think about. Morning, my lord Tenshikage. A merchant sat down beside Naruto at the counter. Naruto slurped his noodle and smiled, nodding in acknowledgement. My name is Chang. I just wanted to say thank you again for this opportunity to live in your village. My family and I have never felt safer or more peaceful than we do here. Naruto turned to look at Chang. He was a portly middle-aged man, with gray showing in his black streaky hair. He wore the garb of the academy, so he was clearly one of the villager volunteers. It's no big deal, Naruto said politely. This had become a common occurrence. The news of what was going on in the world, and the strife and wars left the citizens of Tengaku even more appreciative of this safe haven. Chang bowed and left Naruto to his meal. Naruto watched him walk back to his table where a happy plump woman and 3 excited kids were waiting. Naruto turned back to his ramen. The world was a mess outside, but he'd helped make here safe for so many. Was there a way to help more people? His forehead wrinkled as he sank deeper into thought. Nagi strained, pushing his body up with one hand for the 100th time this morning. Sweat dripped off his skin, his dreadlocks tied back to prevent them from blocking his view. Nuik wasn't kidding about not taking it easy on him anymore. Before dawn he was being put through the ringer for 2 hours, what Nuik called a warm-up, and then, and only then, did they start working on his training. His master had a better understanding of chakra use and molding than Nagi had given him credit for. The Sun Source did not use jutsu as a choice, but that did not mean it was not versed in its use. As Nuik explained it, how could you attack a jutsu user if you had no idea what his weaknesses were? Nagi was for the first time in his life receiving proper training in the use of his bloodline. He was able to feel the shadow chakra, to do more than instinctively melt into shadow. He was being taught to sense where it was. The goal was to reach a point where he could then command that same shadow and shape it. He was far from that right now, but he had faith in his teacher. If there was a way, Nook would pull it out of him. I see you've begun to daydream. On what, one must wonder? Nook's voice snapped at him. Perhaps we leave the philosophical thoughts on the workings of the universe to greater minds, and we instead focus on our training. Nagi grunted and pushed through his set with a heave. He sat down and breathed heavily for exactly 2 breaths. Any more than that would have earned him disapproval. Even the 2 brought a frown from his teacher. He should have better control of his breathing than that. He pulled his legs into lotus position and exhaled slowly, inhaling the good energy from around him. Now, feel the shadow. Nook's voice floated towards him. It is beside you, behind you. It is yours. You are part shadow. The shadow is part you. Blend into it. Nagi inhaled, reaching out with his instincts, feeling the shadows around him, beneath him. He sank into the shadow slowly, with purpose. 1 hour in the shadow today, Nook commanded as he sunk. Spend the time in the darkness, letting it seep into your pores, he said as the tips of Nagi's hair disappeared out of sight into the ground. Calamity watched Nagi disappear and shuddered. She couldn't help it. Every day he did it, but it still seemed weird. But she had no time to think about it much. Nook turned his attention now to her. Have you decided? He looked at her curiously. Calamity nodded. He'd given her homework. His one complaint about her fighting was that she lacked good close combat skills. Either she was to be a sniper from afar, or learn a close combat skill so as to not bring shame unto Sananju by dying. Since she didn't think practically she could exclusively snipe from afar, Calamity had chosen to learn a close combat skill. Nook had given her a choice of weapons and skills to learn and offered her 1 week to select. Today that week was up. I have thought about what you said, Master, Calamity said carefully. If someone gets close enough to me despite the reach and accuracy of Sananju archery, then that person means to kill me, and I should in turn fight to kill that person. I would choose to learn a skill that would enable the maximum destruction of my opponent, with the least harm to me. Of course. Nook waved his hand dismissively. This is only logical. He waited for her to continue. That being said, and in my capacity as an archer, I would like to learn an unarmed combat technique. All the weight I carry should be used for arrows and bows. If someone is skilled enough to reach that close, I would honor them with a quick death. Nook studied Calamity for a full minute in silence. This is an answer I would have expected from a warrior of my village. I am pleased to see that you have learned something from this humble man before you. However, your fingers must not be at risk of damage, it would render your archery skills useless. He reached into a bag he'd brought to the field and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to her with a solemn look on his face. Calamity accepted the package and carefully unwrapped it. Inside were 2 beautifully ornate carved long daggers, each 12 inches long and slightly curved. They were housed in a single leather holster, each dagger angled away from each other. Stunned, Calamity realized the casing had been recently adjusted to her size. She looked up at her master in shock. These once belonged to my own flesh and blood. I pass them down to you. You will not embarrass Sananju or these blades by not becoming a master at them. Yes, sensei. Calamity all but shouted, tears welling in her eyes. Nook nodded in satisfaction. You now have to learn both archery and knife work. This means double the training. He grinned. Let us see how a weak woman handles the workload of a man. Calamity grinned, but couldn't help but feel trepidation at what she had gotten herself into. Wind Country, Senjai approached the village at the crack of dawn. He stretched as he walked, smiling, thinking about the mini-adventure he'd just been on. This village was close to the border, but it had no strategic value to Konoha. He still spotted a few Awagakure, though they were minding their own business, so he avoided them. The note safely in his pocket, he approached the first person he met, a kindly old lady who was carrying a bucket of water. Excuse me? He began with a smile. The old lady turned slightly and looked him up and down. Without another word, she pointed to a garden down a side street. He's in there. She continued to shuffle on her way, leaving a very perplexed Senjai scratching his head. Choosing not to dwell on who the woman thought he was looking for, and wondering if she got it right, then why, he headed towards the garden. Inside he found a beautiful oasis of green shrubbery and tall trees. The sound of running water and a bamboo fountain filled the area, making it seem like he was transported to somewhere else. As he navigated the winding paths, he began to see statues amongst the trees, beautifully carved statues of people in various poses. Mostly the statues were of a woman, an amazingly beautiful one. Her face seemed to glow in the stone, almost looking ethereal. Senji followed the sound of a hammer chiseling at stone, and he found himself looking at a nondescript man possibly in his mid-30s, who was hard at work on another of these statues. The man had jet black hair that was long and tied low on his back. His face was calm and betrayed no emotion other than a small smile. Ahem! Senji cleared his throat. The man looked up and smiled broader, but went back to his work. Go away, he said with a smile. Senji didn't know how to respond to the dismissal, not having expected it. Sorry to interrupt, but I have a letter for a Mr. Sita? The man stopped what he was doing and looked at Senji properly this time. He never stopped smiling though. His eyes went to the two kodachi blades strapped to Senji's back. A letter, you say? Isn't that a fine thing? Someone writing me. The man smiled and turned his head. Only one person that I know would do such a thing. How is Tenchi? Senji breathed a sigh of relief at having found the person he was sent to contact. Now he could get this mission over with and head back to Tengaku. He's fine. He fished inside his shirt and brought out the letter. The man waved him off though. I don't want it. The man smiled and picked back up his hammer and chisel, looking at the face of the statue. Tenchi can take his letters with their flowery words and promises, and shove them so far up his own ass that his ancestors taste the ink. The man clinked and chiseled away at the hair of the statue. Senji stood stunned. How dare you speak of Master Tenchi that way? Senji sputtered. The man just smiled and ignored Senji. Senji was about to step forward and forcibly make the man accept the letter and eat his words when they heard a woman's scream coming from back out in the street. With a curse, Senji turned and headed towards the sound. The man watched Senji run off and his face took on a more curious expression. He put down the tools and picked up a wrapped object. He followed the young boy who so hurriedly ran towards someone in need of help. Senji burst into the street and took in the scene. Those Awagakure he'd spotted earlier had decided to make some sport of the locals. They tied up a man to a wall and were laughing, throwing shuriken around him, seeing how close they could come without killing him. Already a few cuts about his sides indicated their lack of aim. A small crowd of villagers had gathered protesting this abuse, but not actively interfering. A single woman though, possibly the man's wife, was being held back from running to his aid. The two nin who were holding her back were leering at her in a way that got Senji's blood boiling. He'd seen enough. A quick count showed that there were maybe 12 nin around. Two of the nin fired a brace of shuriken at the man tied to the wall. He yelled out in fear as they sped towards him. Senji disappeared, his shunshin perfect as he appeared in front of the man. His blades were drawn and batting aside the shuriken as if they were slow-moving flies. He stood there, eyes blazing, deciding to give them a chance. I am Senji Makoto, the Dark Blade, second member of the Dai Tenchi, first squad of Tengaku. You have one chance to leave here alive. Take it. His voice was low and calm. Naruto would be proud of him for giving them this chance. The two who had just thrown the shuriken decided that this upstart needed to be dealt with. They lunged forward in unison, one snapping out a pair of kamas, the other a katana. Senji leapt forward to meet them. His swords were true, parrying the attacks of the two. He flicked his right sword in a circle, then forward, slicing the ear off the katana wielder. To his credit, the man didn't slow down, dropping low and aiming for Senji's knees. The kama wielder used perfect form, attacking with both at intervals, one aimed at Senji's head, the other for his torso. Senji just wasn't there anymore. He'd flash-stepped past them and his sword swung in sharp arcs, slicing their backs open. They fell to the floor writhing in agony. Their shrieks drowned out all other noise in the street. Senji shook their blood from his blades and looked to the remaining 9. Of them 3 looked very formidable. The others looked scared and angry at the same time. Senji ignored them, realizing where his real threat would come from and focusing on the 3 dangerous ones. One step forward, swinging a kusarigama. Senji tightened his grip on his kodachi and leaned forward. He vanished in a blur, the enemy likewise speeding towards him. They collided in a clash of steel, Senjiai's glowing green blade streaking through the air, parrying the swinging sickle blade, and evading attempts to trap him with the chain. A second nin joined the fray with a long metal pike. Senjiai twisted his body to avoid a thrust that would have skewered his belly. He rolled along the shaft of the pike, swinging his swords in circles seeking to slice the newcomer. The nin snapped the pike though, and in a feat of strength flipped Senjiai into the air. The first nin caught Senjiai's leg in midair with the length of chain, and snapped him back to the ground. "Hi!" the nin shouted as a weak but painful bolt of electricity shot through the chains. It was enough to cause Senjiai's muscles to twitch as he broke free. He shook it off and stepped back, the two men standing side by side and grinning at Senjiai. It was clear they had experience working together as a team. Senjiai's lips tightened into a line. This wasn't going to be easy. "Hey kid." The one who hadn't yet joined the fight shouted to him. "You've got some skill, but you're going to die here today. Why get involved at all?" Tenchi's friend, who had been watching the fight with interest so far, looked at Senjiai with genuine curiosity as to the answer. Senjiai, to his credit, spat into the dust and smiled. "Where I'm from, we don't pick on the weak and helpless. It's my duty to stand in between people like them." He motioned to the civilians watching and the man still tied to the wall. "And people like you." He grinned wider. "Besides, the world will be a better place without your ugly faces in it." The two he had fought before leapt forward in unison. Senjiai leapt to the right, forcing them to turn, and giving him a single opponent for a few seconds. With a rapid swing he parried the pike up and slid down low, on his knees, seeking to disembowel the nin. His partner's kick to Senjiai's side saved him though, sending Senjiai skidding in the dust. He rolled quickly, in time to feel the sharp sting of the sickle blade bite into his side. He twisted free and inhaled sharply. He was now positioned in a way that there were no civilians behind the enemy. He started to thrust his blades forward, faster and faster, until they were a black and green blur, the booms of the invisible cutting force loud in the area. "Faster! Faster! Thousand darkness strike!" he shouted, exerting all his strength and speed into this attack. The two nin he had been fighting fell to the onslaught. A few of the other IWA nin who had held back also fell. The main leader, though, had a sword of his own out and was spinning it on a small rope attached to the handle. He was blocking every thrust force attack that Senjiai was sending. When the attack ended, he was unscathed and seemingly unperturbed. Senjiai fell to a knee exhausted. This attack took a lot out of him. His blades hummed though in excitement at the battle. He knew they would not heal him until after, so he was very conscious of the blood flowing out of his side. "Not bad," the leader said. "My turn." He stamped his foot, and the ground caved in by 2 feet. Just dropped. Senjiai lost his footing as the ground began to shift. A stone spike erupted from the shifting ground and almost impaled Senjiai. He saw it at the last second and rolled left. Another burst from the dust, then another. The man was trying to kill him using jutsu. He felt a sudden sharp pain suddenly, and knew his leg had been caught. He looked down and saw a thin long rock spike sticking through his thigh. Blood spurted over it, and he looked as a bigger spike came towards him, unable to dodge it. Time seemed to slow down as his death approached. He saw the leader begin to laugh. Then, without seeing any movement at all, the man he'd been sent to bring the letter to was suddenly standing next to the leader, putting a sword back in its scabbard. Simultaneously, the leader's head fell in slow motion from his shoulders. The rock outcropping stopped growing immediately, mere inches from Senjiai's heart. The blood loss was too great though, and Senjiai blacked out. Senjiai came to slowly, his eyes opening carefully. He could feel his body healing, the swords doing their job. He was in a modest but very well-kept room. On one side was a mantel with a picture of a woman and boy with incense burning, a shrine. He turned his head, and on the other side of the room was the sculptor, who was seated in a large chair, reading the letter Tenchi had sent. Senjiai began to push himself up on his elbows. "Lie back. Give the swords time to work," the man said firmly. Senjiai was stunned. He'd told no one about their special ability. "How?" "I've traveled far, heard many tales, including the tale of Ganjiang and Amoyi, the assassin's blades. I even heard one tale about their ability to heal their owner. Fascinating to see that one be true." He didn't look up from the letter, seemingly absorbing each word. After a few minutes of silence he sighed and put the paper down. His brow furrowed as he looked at Senjiai. Why did you risk your life for people you do not know or owe anything to? He asked quietly. Senji shrugged uncomfortably. That's my way. My friend Naruto would say it's our duty, as warriors of Tengaku. The man nodded, as if this confirmed something in his own mind. My name is Sita Sujiro. When I was but a child, I was a skilled swordsman. But one with no heart. I was a shell used by a stronger-willed warrior to do his own evils. I eventually met a man who showed me a different path. He defeated me in battle not by being cold and emotionless, but by embracing those emotions. He too fought for people other than himself. I set out that day all those years ago to find my own wandering path. He glanced at the mantle. I found emotion and a family. Happiness. But I was robbed of that by the most innocent of things. In times such as this, when war abounds, it was not a blade that took my happiness, but a disease. He sat in silence for a few minutes, lost in his memories. Your master Tenchi was a friend of mine at that time. He tried his best to help, using what herbs he knew, calling favors and doctors to no avail. I spurned him afterwards. Despised him for trying to save her and failing. He looked at Senji. I still cannot face him, but I recognize him as one of my last and best friends. Do you know what he has asked of me in this letter? Senji shook his head. The man nodded. That is good. It is the old way. He has asked for me to apprentice you for a period of time, and elevate you to the level of Blade Master. His eyes grew hard. Your skills are passable, but sloppy. Your movements predictable and slow. Tenchi knew this when he sent you here, so he has taken a gamble. Senji was confused. What gamble? I only have one way to teach and pass on my knowledge. It is the old way. At the end of our training, either you will kill me or I will kill you. He stood up quickly. Rest for now, let the magic heal you. From tomorrow, hell starts. Senji fell back onto the bed stunned, staring at the ceiling. Damn that Tenchi. Outside Konoha, hidden training bunker, Shikamaru felt them approaching. Even from this distance he could feel his connection with his friends strongly. He could almost see it. Like a thin line, one leading west the other south. His experiences becoming a shadow had awakened a minor sight. He could see part of the world that normal people could not. He sat and waited. Within minutes Shino and Kiba approached the clearing at the same time. Shikamaru looked up, the moon was directly overhead. It was midnight now. He looked at his friends carefully. Shino was taller, his limbs longer and sharper looking. His style of clothing had changed as well. He no longer hid underneath a large coat. He wore a simple full-body leather suit, with spandex in the right places to allow for movement. Green piping highlighted certain aspects of the suit. He still kept the lower half of his face hidden behind a long green scarf. Kiba was massive. His body had grown larger and wilder somehow. His muscles were hairy, and his hair shaggy and wild. He wore animal skins and leather stitched together carefully into a sturdy outfit. There was something very feral about him. Akamaru had also grown wilder. No longer looking like the large domesticated dogs of his clan, Akamaru looked more wolf now. Kiba's eyes glowed golden in the moonlight. Shino's eyes glowed green. Welcome back, Shikamaru said. His voice sounded hollow. It had been a while since he'd spoke to anyone. Shika, Kiba growled. His voice was deep and throaty. You smell wrong. Like a dead thing. But not quite. Yes. Shino's voice had an eerie hiss-like echo to it. You are still you, but you are something else as well. Shikamaru nodded. We all are, aren't we? They looked at each other in silence, sizing each other up. What now? Kiba asked. Shikamaru looked to the sky again. It's time. His eyes went black as he allowed his shadow self to slip through. We take back the leaf. Tengaku, Naruto sat perfectly still. He allowed the natural chakra of the air surrounding him to seep into his pores. Pa-Toad said he should feel at one with the energy, and control it, do not let the energy overpower him. He had no sense of either. Instead he felt as if he were in a lake and the waters were lapping at him gently. He used this time to think. Naruto never counted himself a smart man. Other men had grand ideas. Like Yoshi, the mad inventor who had created Heavenstone. They'd used that miracle stone to create a small village on the ground miles from here. That village only existed in sunlight. At dusk all the merchants used a special seal to disappear, coming back to Tengaku with their remaining goods. The disappearing village was starting to become famous. Not least because Guerrera had designed it in the same style as Tengaku. Tall spires and majestic arches. The village was becoming known as the Disappearing Gates to Heaven. Though it wasn't a village at all, just an outlet market. But stories spread and truth is lost along the way. The council loved it, of course. It added to the mystique of Tengaku. Items bought from the merchants of heaven went for top dollar. Naruto shook his head. He needed to focus his thoughts. He really meant what he had said to the Titan. There had to be a way to save more people. Protect more people. If only he could talk this out with someone. His face then lit up. He had an idea. In a cloud of smoke, another Naruto clone sat across from him. Who said talking to yourself was a bad idea? So what's the real problem? The clone asked him. Naruto frowned. Even I can't be everywhere at once. Why would you want to be? To protect everyone. You don't do that here, though. In Tengaku. Yes. Well, no, not really. So how are they safe? Tengaku is safe. Well, make everywhere safe then. The clone exclaimed, sure it had found the solution. How? The clone looked pensive. Both he and Naruto shouted at the same time. I've got it. The clone nodded in agreement, a wide grin on his face. Sexy no jutsu. Naruto grimaced and dismissed the clone. No, this time he had a real idea. He thought about it some more, then decided to tell everyone tonight at dinner. What? Jiraiya exclaimed in shock. The unnamed lands? The Badlands or Wastelands? Whatever it's called. It's massive, and full of suffering. There are also peaceful villages, but with so many warlords wandering around, I don't think they'd mind. I want to claim it all, and have it under our protection, Naruto said quietly. The room sat in stunned silence. Tsunade, Jiraiya, Tenchi, Guerrera, Mabry, Ali, Tora were all in attendance. None of them could think of what to say to that. Look, Naruto continued. We live safely here in our bubble, but out there people are dying, suffering. We have the power, some power at least, to try to stop that. I want us to reach out to the lands with no name, no leaders, and form. I don't know a country, I guess. Like the lands of wind, or fire. Except this will be. Naruto groaned exasperatingly. I don't know a land of hope or something. They still said nothing. The first to speak up was surprisingly Guerrero. You are a surprising young man, the giant said in his booming voice. That he is. Tenchi agreed. This is so ambitious it's astounding. Naruto smiled. More ambitious than building a city in the sky? Jiraiya laughed. Ha! Yes, much more. What you're talking about, it's not been done since the days of the birth of the great villages. And this is untamed lands. The Badlands extends from the red rivers of the Blood Country and lava fields to the north to the icy seas of the south. West to the ocean and east to the sands of the Land of the Wind. So you're saying it's kinda big? Naruto asked. Kind of big? Jiraiya asked incredulously. Kind of? Tsunade rocked back in her chair. You know, if you do pull this off, you'd control the second biggest country in the world, after the Land of the Wind. It would make us an even bigger target for Danzo's machinations. It would also protect countless people. Naruto insisted. It would save so many people. We could save people. He was almost pleading with them. The older heads in the room grinned. Okay, easy now. Jiraiya laughed. I didn't say no. Ali sighed. You seek to take away my clan's livelihood. How will we survive if we cannot relieve rich fools of their gold? Naruto twisted his mouth. You could always steal from our enemies. Ali's eyes narrowed. Are you hereby promising me first loot rights on all spoils of war? Hey, wait just a minute now. Tenchi chimed in. That's not what he said. Ali nodded. I understood it as such. I gladly accept the offer of the Tenshikage. We will of course split the spoils 50-50, but taking first pick. This is against any enemies of Tengaku or the Land of Hope. He sat back down seemingly pleased with himself. That's a stupid name though. He added on. Land of Hope doesn't inspire any level of fear. And to keep warlords in check or even Danzo, you need something a little more threatening than hope. Nagi laughed. Maybe something that is similar, hopeful but also strong. Naruto shrugs. We can come back to that. There's something else I want to talk to you all about. They looked at him expectantly. I want us to consider changing a small thing. He looked at them with the most innocent expression on his face. Just a small thing. I realized something in the Blood Country. I don't want to kill anyone anymore. He paused, looking out the window into the night sky. There were countless enemies, and people who were horrible who may have deserved it. But I can't consider myself their judge. All I want to do is protect people. Stop the bad guys, yes, but I'd like to leave their punishments to someone else. Maybe a council or something. I'd like us, Tengaku, to consider changing our methods and adopting a saving fist. A fist that would be used to help and protect, but not kill. Tenchi whispered. Katsujinkan. Yes. Naruto nodded. I can't force anyone to do this with me, but I'm going to try to do it. That's all I want to say. He sat down with an exhalation of air. They all sat in silence a bit longer. So we are to create a new country, but don't kill anyone in a fight if we can help it. Jiraiya asked with a wry smile. Want us to wear blindfolds as well, maybe? Tsunade asked with a snort. Naruto blushed but said nothing. We each must decide for him or herself whether to follow that path, Naruto. We hear you, but I think that's a personal decision, Tenchi said. Naruto nodded. I understand. He clapped his hands together. Okay. So what should we call our new country? Emperor Tower, Konoha. Danzo stared out the window into the evening sky. He tightened his fists, his eye taking in everything about the changes that he'd wrought upon this village. Many of the weaker villagers had left long ago. The town itself had changed. The buildings had been fortified, made more militaristic. He supposed in some way he should thank Naruto. The brat's attack that one time had given him the perfect excuse to make modifications to the structures. Now every building was a mini-fortress, and part of the bigger protection that was now Konohagakure. He looked on with some pride as the nin milled about below, going about their duties. He would have allowed himself a smile, but something nagged at his subconscious. Something those years of experience had taught him not to ignore. You summoned us? The voice of Scorpion was soft, mildly disinterested. Danzo didn't bother to turn. His 4 commanders and the unpredictable Lash would be standing behind him, along with his most trusted root commanders. Do you know what the beauty of war is? Danzo asked quietly, not actually expecting a response. It is because battle is the single most significant competition a man can indulge in. It brings out all that is best, and it removes all that is base. Is it not sweet and fitting to die for your country, for your village? We are always at war, mankind. In one way or the other, and to pretend otherwise is a fool's game. My predecessors believed that peace was reality. Fooled themselves into believing that it was even a possibility. How can there be such a thing? Peace. It is ridiculous. Man was born a fighter. We ninja are honed to fight. To do otherwise is to fly in the face of all that we are and deny all that we could be. My armies are at this very moment laying claim to the mines of the land of blood. With that link to gold and jewels, we no longer need tread carefully with our enemies in the east. Our spies are now entrenched in the land of Wave and the Crescent Moon Kingdom. It is time to activate them. I have made arrangements so that 2 full platoons of Root and IWA Nin will be there within the week. The night that they reach the harbor, I want the royal family of Crescent Moon dead. When the assassin's work is complete, my men will move in. Centipede, I want you to meet that group at the southern harbor of 2 Pillars. You will lead them and send word of your success. Yes, my emperor. Centipede genuflected dramatically, then disappeared. Go, hero. He called out to one of the Root commanders. It is time for us to stop differentiating between former Iwagakure soldiers and Konoha soldiers. Let them know that Iwagakure no longer exists. All are Konoha now. If we are to fight, we will fight as one. The symbol of rock or leaf no longer represents who we are. Have our smiths draw this up, but I want a fist to be my new symbol. A clenched fist ready to strike. Go-Hero nodded but did not move. He had not been officially dismissed, and he knew better than to take leeways that the 4 may be able to. Something is coming, Danzo said, glaring into the dusk. I can feel it in my gut. I know there are factions who still want me gone. We will be ready for them. Lash, Scorpion. Put everyone on high alert. Let's lock down this ville. No. This citadel. I want all the voices of dissent silenced. Again he looked out the window, his hidden Sharingan eyes spinning wildly. Something is coming. I don't know what yet, but... His eyes caught something odd happening far below. He leaned out of the window, and the blood vessels in his face threatened to burst. He sputtered wildly and madly and pointed to the courtyard where the water fountain was once again, as it had once long ago, bursting with bright orange-colored water. Find whoever did this. Find them. Ino stepped into the cool shadows of the back of her father's shop. She looked around, realizing even then that she need not have done so. Since the militarization of Konoha, not many had need of flowers. With a sigh, she walked through the flowers and looked out the back door. From here she had a clear line of sight of the north wall and the guard posted on it. She glanced down at her watch and sat down, waiting for the exact second. With the tick of the hand on her watch, she launched her spirit towards the guard, taking him over completely. Through his eyes she looked around and noted the positions of the other guards. With a nod to herself, she vanished off the wall and raced into the tree line. She paused for a bit and looked around. After a few minutes she decided she was not being followed and satisfied leapt off to her meeting. Chuji yawned, stretching his muscles until he heard a satisfying crack. With a sigh he strolled to the front gate, looking at his watch casually. Hey fat boy. Where do you think you're going? The kitchens are that way. A particularly belligerent guard shouted out to him. Chuji's eyes narrowed. He'd learned to control his anger at the insult, but this guard in particular had harangued him mercilessly for the past month that he'd been going on patrol. Funny, he growled as he walked past. As he entered he began to move with surprising speed, heading deeper into the woods. The signal was understood. It was time. This is your plan? The stranger who stood with the mannerisms of Ino said quietly. Shikamaru nodded. It felt good to be surrounded by all of his friends. It had been so long since he'd seen them, though technically he still wasn't seeing Ino. The room held the hulking mass of Kiba and Akamaru, the ominous Shino, the imposing Chuji, the ephemeral Ino, and the shadowy genius Shikamaru. Between them he felt that they could do anything. Yes. Can you do your part? Shikamaru asked Ino. The man nodded. When? 3 days from now. Shikamaru replied. By then we'll know where the clans stand. Hinata did not come, Kiba said quietly, his deep voice still sounding like a growl, though a gentle one. Her clan is seen as the biggest threat to Danzo's authority. They are under special scrutiny and watch. She would not have been able to get away on such a short notice. Ino explained. The rest of them nodded and stood in silence, looking at each other, taking in their company. The words did not need to be spoken. One or more of them may not live to see the others again after the attack. After a minute, Ino sighed. Well boys, we've come a long way together. Naruto's army for the win. The possessed man smiled, then drew a knife and cut his own throat. Ino leaving the body the second the knife began to penetrate. He fell to the ground gurgling in his death throes while the others left to make their arrangements. Far to the west and south, Badlands, the horde moved noisily. There was no sense of order or arrangement. They didn't march in a neat line or unit. They were chaos monsters. Claw and fang and foul beasts of the undead. The nightmare moved slowly north, only able to move under cover of darkness. They were made up of mostly full-fledged lower demons, so were unable to travel in sunlight. The 3 generals in the lead, though, had no such limitations. They came to a stop on a hill overlooking a small village. The scent of Kurama is in the air everywhere. It's faint, but it's there. The darkness cover is slowing us down too much. Let the horde camp out here, and the 3 of us find our prey first. How can we do that, if his presence is all around? He must have been all over this blasted continent. No, his human host has an air affinity. He's binding his chakra with the earth's air streams. He's powerful, this one. Bah. He's a meat puppet. We'll just eat him, and we'll draw Kurama out. That doesn't help us find him, though. I can detect his shards. The other tailed beasts that were once part of him. Ji-hoon chimed in. He'd been abused daily by the 3 generals. None of them had much patience for him, one who already had failed Lord Magnus. Yes, we know, Ji-hoon. Tezai growled. Magnus wants us to dispatch those first to draw out Kurama. He grabbed Ji-hoon by the throat and lifted him in the air. Tezai was at least 9 feet tall with skin made of stone. His weapon of choice, A giant two-sided double-edged sword was strapped to his back and glinted ominously in the moonlight. Why do you think we keep you around? The pleasure of your company? Some pieces are still scattered. But I think we can find most of them in one place, in that direction. He pointed east and north. Leave the horde. We'll travel faster without them. We can be there in days instead of months. Benisato hissed. The female snake demon wore the skin of a gorgeous human woman, but was the second most deadly of the bunch. Almost immortal, at her core was a demon white snake, the most poisonous, the most dangerous animal in the known world. Her touch was poison, her red playful lips inviting painful agonizing death. Agreed. Let them stay here and feast on as much human flesh as the area has. When we move to face Kurama we'll come back for them, Bokyosei said quietly. The leader of the three generals, not much was known about this quiet half-demon other than his legendary rage and strength. Jihun nodded in acquiescence and led the way down the hill and towards the direction he detected the shards of the 10 tails. He wondered why they were mostly clumped together, but he knew better than to voice his doubts now. Besides, there was nothing these generals could not handle. Wind country. Senji gripped his swords tightly, sweat beading his forehead. Pushing himself to his limit, he blocked the lightning speed of Sujiro's attack. Again, he barely managed to get his swords there in time. The Blade Master was fast. Too fast. And what irked Senji was that he felt, no. He knew that Sujiro was holding back. His resolve burned inside him. How far did he still have to go? Your mind wanders, Sujiro said quietly from across the empty clearing they'd found themselves in. The sound of the nearby waterfall acted as a calming, tranquil contrast to the violence of their training. You're so fast, Senji said, his voice laced with frustration. No, I'm not, Sujiro responded. You're so slow, Senji swore. Sujiro laughed. No. I don't mean it in a bad way. You're fast for a swordsman. But to be a true Blade Master, you have to transcend being just a swordsman. You are familiar with the flame and the void? Senji nodded. I've been able to use it in battle. Sujiro smiled. Good. 2 things you must remember. 1. The void can take you incredibly far. The void is a place devoid of emotion, of the weights of this world, of worry. That is what will elevate your speed to godlike. What's the second thing? Senji asked. There is a singular step beyond the void. The final step that we will take in our journey as student and master. We will come back to that later, after you've mastered the void. For now, though. He drew his sword and began tapping his back foot against the ground. Are you ready? Senji didn't bother to answer. Sujiro disappeared. Only small explosions in the ground where he passed gave Senji a vague idea of where Sujiro was. He focused and brought his blades up to parry, not fast enough this time, being rewarded for his failure with a spike of blood along his shoulder. He grimaced and turned. This was going to be a long day. Tengaku, Naruto stood at the edge of the floating island, feeling the air around him, his eyes closed. Far below him was the ocean, its cool blue waters reflecting the bright sunshine. He breathed out slowly. Quickly gathering his chakra, he spun 2 shuriken raisingans this size of oranges in his palms. They hummed with muted energy. With a surge of chakra, he flung them towards the open sea. He'd been working on these by himself for a while now, and really needed to see how far they'd go. He watched them skim straight ahead, riding the air currents. He could see them, no. With his chakra open, he could almost feel them. Almost without thinking, he reached out for them, willing them to turn. Amazingly, they did. He felt the shifting projectiles and their maelstrom of destruction as a disturbance in the chakra all around him. They exploded far beyond his sight. Thoughtfully, Naruto crafted another one and let it spin wildly in his palm. Studying it carefully, he noticed again that he could not just see it, but feel its presence. With a thought, it hovered above his hand. Turning his head slightly, he mentally asked the wind chakra inside the Rasengan and around it to cooperate, and he lifted it to eye level. He stared at it curiously, excitedly. The chakra inside the Rasengan was screaming to be let loose. He could feel its urgency like it was alive. On instinct, he reached out and held on to the glowing blue orb with the spinning wind blades. It did not harm him. With his fingers, it felt solid. He dug into it and split the Rasengan into 2, almost expecting an explosion. But the chakra followed the commands of its master. The 2 have shrunk into smaller versions of the Rasen Shuriken. maintaining their shape, their potency. He let them go again, floating in front of his face, while he thought about how he could use this in battle. He briefly toyed with doing some sort of shield like his friend Gaara does with his sand, but the Rasengan was an offensive weapon. Exploding by his face sounded like a bad idea. He frowned. It would have to be an attack then. Naruto shrugged and mentally flung the 2 mini Rasen shurikens out to see where they exploded harmlessly. "Hey Naruto!" The voice called out to him from the path that led to this spot. He turned and saw Inari running towards him. The boy had changed. He looked competent. Like a young warrior. "What's up, Inari?" He responded with a smile. "Got a message from the disappearing village. There's an emissary who wants to meet you." "A what?" Naruto asked, confused. "An emissary. An ambassador. From Kumogakure." Inari responded with a small laugh. "Kumo? Okay. What's so funny?" Naruto smiled and asked as they walked towards the exit to the ground below. "He's got a lot of swords, and looks kinda scary, but he's a great rapper." Inari chuckled in delight. "Konoha Inazaki compound, Kiba!" some exclaimed. His mother rushed over and hugged him tightly. Before he'd left she was taller than him, but not her head rested firmly against his chest. The rest of the clan approached smiling. Their canine companions nodding to Akamaru with respect. "Hi, Mom," Kiba said quietly, smiling. His voice was deep but warm. Some was still surprised by it. Hana walked over and punched Kiba playfully on the shoulder. "You've changed, little brother," she said, smiling widely. Kiba smiled and nodded back. He looked around. The whole clan had gathered as he asked. The dogs were on watch, so he knew he could talk safely. No one would be listening. "Shikamaru has come up with his plan. It's time to make our move," he said bluntly. The head of the clan stepped forward. "We've been waiting on this for some time. Our companions are at full strength and rested, our armor and weapons ready." He lowered his head, shocking a few other members of the clan. This was a tacit acknowledgement of Kiba as the alpha, the new clan leader. But anyone who doubted only had to look at Kiba and feel the animalistic presence rolling off of him in waves. He had reached the pinnacle of their animal style. Kiba grunted in approval. "We attack in 3 days. It's all or nothing. We fight as a pack, we drive them out, we take back our den." "Konoha Aburaim compound, in just 3 days?" a powerful member of the clan asked. "Can we be in position and ready in that time?" All the Kiki-eye bugs in attendance buzzed and bristled at Shino being questioned. He was the undisputed leader of the insects, a representative of the All-Hive. His word was law and should never be doubted. "Okay, settle down," Shibi Aburaim said quietly. "Shino leads us now, so we simply follow." Shino cracked his shoulder bones, looking ominously at the man. "It is a fair question. I allow it." He looked toward the tall imposing new Emperor's Tower rising like a spire in the middle of Konoha. "Our nest has been invaded. We will kill them all, or chase them away. But we cannot coexist." "Konoha Nara household, and what if we fail Shika?" Shikaka asked quietly. "We will not, father," Shikamaru responded in the dark. There was no need for lights, they could see and hear in the dark just fine. "We cannot afford to," he continued. "But I've planned for the contingency. We'll have to abandon Konoha and flee. Danzo's retribution would be swift. I predict if we lose, there will be only an hour of chaos where we must make our escape. All the women and children must leave as soon as the attack begins. If they leave before, it would alert Danzo's forces that something was happening." "Escape to where?" Shikaka pondered quietly. "Where in this war-torn world is safe? Where can we move the surviving clans to? Suna? Kumo?" Shika shook his head in the darkness. "If we lose, and are on the run from Danzo? Only heaven can protect us." Chapter 32, Purge. The sentries on the wall stretched as the sun rose steadily in the east. They'd been on high alert all night, raised to that level by an apparently overzealous commander. They'd been ready for anything and nothing had happened. That and the fact that their shift was over lulled them into being complacent for the first time in 8 hours. It was the last mistake they ever made. There were 20 sentries posted around the wall, 4 in total facing the western forest. All 4 died simultaneously. In a green blur 4 bodies fell to the ground, their heads having been removed from their bodies. Fountains of blood erupted and rained down. Shino didn't bother to look back at his work, instead racing around the top of the wall, his custom curved blades in his hands. 5, 6, 7. 3 minutes later he had taken care of the wall guards. He sent a signal out to his insect brethren, who communicated his message to all the members of his clan. The purge had begun. They poured like ants out of a disturbed hill. The members of the Aburame clan and the Inazaki clan emptied into the streets. The dawn had now broken and their mission was a clear one. Cleanse all root and IWA from their home. They came across a few stragglers and made easy work of them. Kiba was tempted to lead his people and attack the looming tower in the distance, his instincts telling him to take out Danzo, but that wasn't the plan. Instead, he let the majority of his warriors engage in hand-to-hand combat through the streets. He looked back at the gates to his home and nodded in respect to his mother. She grunted in acknowledgement, and a smaller contingent began moving the weaker members of their clan, the children, and the pups down the safe corridor that Shino had created for them. The streets and direction they headed down had no living root or Iwagakyu members left. They were met as they worked their way out by the likewise young of the Aburame clan, and those who they trusted enough to tell their plans to. Within minutes the city was as empty of innocents as it was going to be. They melted into the forest and headed for the secret clan bunkers to wait for the result of the attack. They've started, Scorpion told Danzo quietly. They watched as the battle started to rage in the streets surrounding the clan quarters. Danzo allowed himself a small smile. Fools. A direct assault. But it's the Inazaki dogs after all. Can't expect big ideas from that bunch. I'm surprised at the Aburames though. He waved at them. No matter. We can now begin clearing out all traitors from this kingdom. Scorpion nodded and leapt away. He met up with a large battalion of mixed IWA and root ninja, waiting for this moment. Let's go. The members of the Aburame clan were working in ever-widening circles, moving in a line like fire ants, destroying everyone in their path. Shino had rejoined them and took the lead. Their territory was removed enough from the Inazaki that he didn't need to worry about wasted energy crossing over already cleaned spaces. They were met with very light resistance. The plan to take Danzo's troops by surprise at the shift change seemed to be working. Too well though, Shino thought. They should have hit a larger block by now. As he crossed over into the grocery district, an explosion rocked the street behind him, pelting him with stone. He looked back and saw several members of his clan down, their blood still a mist mingling with the dust in the aftermath. A force of IWA Nin charged up through a hole in the ground, engaging the flank of the Aburame clan. Shino turned forward. There had to be a frontal attack as well, in order to box them in. He was right. Another force was advancing towards them at breakneck speed. At the lead was one of Danzo's 4 horsemen, Poison Frog. He spotted Shino at the lead and directed a squad of men ahead of him to attack. If he was given to displays of emotion, Shino would have smiled. Instead, he just tensed briefly, then launched himself forward. He trusted his swarm, clan. It was hard for him sometimes to remember the human terms to be able to handle the enemy behind. The enemy in front he would handle himself. Kiba led 10 of his strongest pack members in a straight line towards Danzo's tower. It was 16 blocks away, which any other day would have seemed very close, but today it felt like a lifetime away. They raced at full speed, facing little coordination among the enemies they encountered. His instinct suddenly flooded him, and he leapt off the ground high into the air. Akamaru followed him without hesitation. The ground exploded where their feet had been moments before. He looked back to see his clan members scatter to the side of the street as explosions ripped apart the stone road, their instincts to follow their leader saving them all. As he sailed through the air, propelled forward by his leap, he saw a platoon of roughly 50 IWA Nin burst out of nearby buildings, clearly trying to spring a trap on them. At the lead he saw one of Danzo's 4 horsemen, Snake. Kiba knew without thinking that this was the man who had triggered the earth jutsu that exploded their path. His eyes narrowed and he formed his fingers into claws, tensing his muscles and snarling. His prey was before him. Shino sliced through the coming soldiers like a hot knife through butter. They were packed too tightly to use effective jutsu against him, and none were a match for him in hand-to-hand combat. His training had allowed him to fight on instinct, his muscles responding with twitch-like speed. A Nin rushed him with a long spear, thrusting it towards his torso looking to impale him. He didn't stop his forward momentum, bending backwards at the waist and dropping to his knees, skidding forward in the dirt under the pole. He sliced the man's legs off at the knees and then rolled forward and back to his feet running. A pair of swordsmen swung at him simultaneously. He blocked both blades with his scythes and spun into the body of the one on the right. He kicked backwards, cracking the man on the left's head hard enough for his neck to hit an awkward angle, and spun again, preventing the swordsman he was rolling with from attacking him. Shino placed his blades on his shoulder and spun faster, removing the man's head behind him, and then broke free of the falling dead body to continue forward, towards the real threat, Poison Toad. Kiba landed with a hump, sending a billowing cloud of dust into the air, leaving a small impact crater. His eyes shone golden yellow, his muscles tightened, and he furiously launched himself towards Snake. Snake had no intelligence on this Inazuki clan member, and he prided himself on knowing everything about the ninja in Konoha. One of the traits he was most known for was intense study of his enemies. So this unknown warrior before him was most disconcerting for many reasons. Kiba moved faster than a man his size should have been able to. Snake dodged a swipe from those giant claw hands, but only barely. A growl and he dodged again. This time he avoided the snapping jaws of the giant wolf-dog hybrid that the man before him fought alongside. Their coordination was fantastic, certainly the best he'd ever witnessed. But he grinned and drew his poison needles. He could dodge, which meant these two, as strong as they were, stood no chance. He ducked under another swing and thrust his needles upwards, looking to strike quickly into the large forearms of Kiba. His confidence grew to shock as Kiba sped up, dodging the attack himself and spinning into a back flip, kicking Snake in his jaw, sending him reeling back. He only had a moment to register the attack though, as under the spinning Kiba a roaring Akamaru snapped his giant jaws at him. Snake squirmed away from the attack and kicked out, hitting Akamaru in the snout, sending him skidding back. Kiba let out a low growl that felt like thunder rumbling, his eyes flashing a golden light. Snake sneered and lunged forward again. This dog would not get the best of him. Danzo watched from atop his tower. He could see the two battles raging below him and nodded grimly. Things were going well. The two clans were small and not a match for his forces. They would be wiped out. He spotted movement beyond the Konoha walls and saw the line of women and children heading into the woods. He snarled. They wouldn't get far. He would send Scorpion after them when this battle was done and wipe them out too. He looked back down. All of the fighting was to the northwest and northeast. Something told him to look south. He turned and glanced in that direction. Nothing. The fighting had drawn his defenders north, leaving the south clear. Too clear. He turned quickly and barked orders to Scorpion and Lash. South. Something. The tower rocked from an impact. Dust and stones smashing all around them. A giant fist had come crashing into it, destroying the southern wall. Danzo was thrown from his feet by the sudden impact, as were the others in the room. The fist retracted, leaving a gaping hole and a creaking stone tower. Danzo cursed and looked up at the giant member of the Akimichi clan, that boy Chuji, suddenly standing there taller than the tower itself. His height was impressive, surpassing that of even his father Chuza, whom Danzo could see also strode towards the south side of the tower. He cursed, using every bad word he had accumulated over a long lifetime. He had underestimated this little uprising, but he would not do so again. He had not gotten where he was by being stupid. The Akamachi were not famed for their solo missions. They were part of the Ino-Shikucho attack teams. This led him very quickly to two conclusions. One, that stupid Yamanaka girl was involved in this as well. He had been complacent in allowing her into his orbit. 2. The danger was far from what was obviously in front of him. The Nara clan were brilliant strategists. Lash and Scorpion were quickly at his side, gazing at the 4, now 5 giants that were closing in on the tower. Chuji had stepped sideways, blocking the sun, his shadow covering them in semi-darkness. Shadows, thought Danzo quickly. A barrage of kunai erupted from the shadows on the stone floor. Scorpion stepped in front of Danzo and blocked / parried every projectile with ease. The shadow itself then reached out and grabbed for Scorpion. The black hand that grabbed onto Scorpion shifted and began to bleed the black off, peeling away like tar, showing a real human hand beneath it. Danzo squinted in anger. The Nara clan had been holding back information on their abilities. There was no record of a clan member who could actually be a shadow, only use them. The hand pulled back quickly and the shadow form disappeared into the hundreds of dark crevices the room now held. One of Danzo's root lieutenants spewed forth a long stream of fire jutsu in a circle around the room, the shadows disappearing for a second. Long enough for Lash to make out the one shadow that shouldn't be there, the shape of Shikamaru Nara. Lash moved like lightning and struck at the shadow, his fist connecting with the jaw of the black shape. Even as his skin touched the blackness, it retreated, displaying the skin beneath it. "Your jutsu will not help you in here, young Nara," Danzo growled at him. "No chakra can be formed against my friends here." The face of the shadow was dark again, but Danzo's stolen Sharingan could make out the outline of a smile. The attack wasn't over. The same lieutenant who had used the fire jutsu used it again, this time against Danzo from behind. His clothes and hair immediately caught fire and pain lanced through every inch of his body. Ino's spirit smiled inside the root member as she leapt from him into another in the room, stabbing the previous host with a sword. As Lash and Scorpion turned to their leader to help him, Shikamaru threw a barrage of shuriken at the burning Hokage. Several impacted with satisfying thuds. He allowed himself a single fleeting moment of elation, but that was short-lived. Danzo, however, was not dead or dying, burning for his crimes. He had simply vanished. Cuckoo! Orochimaru laughed in glee watching the battle rage below. He and his apprentice Kabuto stood on a building far enough away from the battle so as not to be drawn into it, but close enough to see bodies falling. "Our facilities have been cleansed, Orochimaru," Kabuto said lightly, adjusting his glasses. "Excellent. We've lingered here too long. Akatsuki would have heard about our temporary residence here by now, and would be on their way to interfere with my research." He glanced left and smiled. "There is but one last thing left to do." Sasuke landed softly on the roof and calmly glared at the two of them. "Are you ready?" Shino narrowly avoided the poison-tipped spear that was thrust with incredible speed towards his face. The toad in front of him had a long reach with that spear, he'd not underestimate him. He brought his size across in front of his body and parried the spear to the left. Toad swung in a circle, the spear whipping around him, whistling as it came back around, sweeping for Shino's legs. Shino shifted his balance to his back leg and raised his front leg over the sweeping spear. He stepped down and forward, bending into a side spin, his sides whirling around him, screaming for blood. Toad raised his spear, leaving the point down, and parried both blades. He then brought up the spear rapidly, hoping to catch Shino with the shaft. Shino was a whirlwind with his blades, Toad dodging and darting his spear forward. Both knew that the slightest mistake would mean instant death. The ninja around them, both IWA and Shino's clan alike, stopped fighting to witness what would be one of the best weapon fights they'd ever see. Snake jumped upwards and spun, his needles spreading out from his hands like an umbrella of death. Kiba didn't block, he was just fast enough to avoid the falling needles. His claw-like hands sought out Snake again and again, but the wiry ninja was slippery and kept evading his grasp. Kiba's frustration grew, but he knew he could not let it cloud his judgment. This enemy was deadly, and delaying him from his primary task. He glanced back and saw that his clan is suffering losses at the hands of the overwhelming force of the IWA Nin. He could no longer play with this prey. He and Akamaru stopped suddenly a mere foot away from each other, seemingly giving Snake an opening and one large target. Snake smiled. "That was your last mistake." His barrage of poison needles was something to witness, as it resembled a solid wall of nails driving forward towards Kiba. In a flash, Kiba and Akamaru had merged and were a spinning tornado of teeth and claws that burst through the wall of needles and tore into Snake. His death was quick. Danzo had reappeared in another part of the room, seemingly unscathed. Even the burnt clothes and hair were back to how they were just a few minutes ago. Shikamaru recovered from his shock quickly enough to move positions into different shadows. Their attack continued. Ino controlled the body she was in and swung her sword at Danzo. He parried the attack and Lash's hands closed on the head of this body. Ino leapt out of it into another Nin in the room, avoiding Lash, Scorpion, or Danzo, figuring that they would be the most risky to try to possess. Lash crushed the man's skull in his fists, and looked towards Scorpion. He got a nod of approval. He tensed up and arms flexed low at his sides, he shouted, and an explosion of air pressure escaped from him in a widening ball. Ino was expelled from the body she was in, and found herself back in the bunker, in her own body. "What the foo!" she exclaimed. Shikamaru felt it as his jutsu was forcibly removed from around his body. He knew Lash's power, like Scorpion, was to cancel out jutsu, but he hadn't known about this ability to project the negating effects without touch. The Nin in the room focused on him, arrows notched to bows and being released. Thankfully, the negating effect of Lash's blast was temporary. He very quickly melted back down into the shadows and moved to the other side of the room. The fire user was dead, so they had no way of removing shadows. He glanced at Lash, but the man looked tired. That skill must have taken a lot of energy. Scorpion had escaped out the window. No. Not escaped, he was attacking Chuji and the other members of the Akamachi clan. His speed and chakra-canceling fists were going to be a problem. Danzo barked Shikamaru, "Today you die for this." He seemed to be looking directly at him now, despite being the shadow. But he couldn't possibly be seeing him unless… Shit, Danzo had a Sharingan eye under those bandages. It's the only explanation. It also explains why months ago Kakashi had been framed for murder. It was Danzo all along, Shikamaru thought. That didn't explain how he survived being killed the first time, but Shikamaru was more than willing to try again. A quick survey of the situation showed him that this first attack had failed, but there were only 5 nin left, plus Lash and Danzo himself. Of course, Lash was at least an S-class and Danzo was technically Hokage level. Shikamaru needed backup. He hoped it was on its way. Shino stood over the body of Poison Toad, his blades dripping with blood. The man's body had been sliced in 3, from waist to shoulder on both sides. The fighting around him had resumed, his swarm decimating the IWA ninja. His instincts told him he was needed at the tower. He saw the giant Chuji fall backwards, shrinking as he did so. The Chakra Destroyer Scorpion had 2 whips out, one around Chuji's neck as they fell. Shino glanced at the work his swarm was doing, making sure it was going well, then leapt towards the rooftops and the tower. As he ran, he felt the presence of Kiba and Akamaru next to him, running silently and at incredible speed, keeping up. The second attack wave was on its way. Ino swore violently as she reached the tree line. She needed to be in sight of someone to take over their body. She scanned but could see no one around. Shino had done a good job of clearing the outside defenses. She ran through the gates, coming across a battle. She jumped out of her body amongst a pile of other bodies, hoping her own body would be safe there. She inhabited the body of an IWA nin gripped in battle with a member of Kiba's clan. She threw the sword she was carrying into the back of another IWA nin, allowing Kiba's clan member to slash the throat of the body she was in. She was already jumping into another body. She rolled in this body, a pack member, and slashed at the ankles of a Root ANBU. She left the body, and jumped into another enemy. This one had a short sword that she liked. She threw the sword high, and in the direction she wanted to go. She left that body and into another, smashing the face of a Root with a hammer. She jumped again and she changed her swing, missing the clan member she was about to kill, instead cutting the arm off an IWA nin. Again, she ducked under a swing. Again, she clubbed a man over the head and leapt over his body. Finally, she was in the body of a female ANBU whose mask had been torn off. She rolled away from the fight, caught the sword she'd thrown earlier as it fell, and rolled up and into a run towards the tower. Shikamaru had to admit he was outclassed. Danzo himself was attacking him, clearly seeing where he was in the smallest of shadow. Only the fact that he kept himself clothed in shadow prevented the others from joining the fight. Lash looked like he recovered enough and was about to join in when 2 shadows slipped into the room. Kiba and Shino made quick work of the regular nin. Lash turned his focus to them, leaving Danzo alone to fight Shikamaru. A small blur entered the room, and suddenly Hinata had joined the fray, lashing out against Danzo. Her diminutive frame moved with the utmost fluidity. Her strikes though were clothed in a harsh blue light in the shape of flaming lions. Danzo found himself attacked on 2 fronts, a much stronger than he realized Hinata Hyuga and an advanced shadow user Shikamaru Nara. More than this, he concluded that if the little Hyuga was siding with these rebels, then most likely her clan was as well, and that could turn the tide against his forces on the ground. If he had been able to look, in fact, he would have seen Hayashi Hyuga leading a force in the north flank against his soldiers. Konoha, East Gate. Do you taste that, sister? The sinister voice of Tezai said as 3 silhouettes walked through the dust and smoke of a deserted street in Konoha. Blood in the air. Benesato smiled. Her long snake-like tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Let's have some fun, before we get what we came for. Tezai growled in anticipation. Bokiosei shrugged and they walked towards the battleground. Konoha, West Gate. 6 shapes clothed in black cloaks with red clouds on them landed in a semicircle in the ground facing the western gate. Each a different size, all had one thing in common. Each had black decorative spikes protruding from their bodies in different places. A 7th appeared, a woman with a large flower in her hair. A battle rages inside the walls, she said. Two are supposed to be here. The six spoke in unison. We will find them now. Rashi, the Four Tails host, stirred from his drug-induced coma. He blinked slowly, his eyes burning from opening after so long. He closed them tightly. He heard faint sounds of fighting. That must be why they missed his last injection. Since Iwagakia had lost the war, he'd been chained to this table and kept drugged. Rashi was no fool. Danzo didn't trust him, and rightly so, for he would not forgive the assassination of his Kage so lightly. He reached inside himself, feeling the presence of Goku, the Four Tails. Good. They'd not been able to find another container for his friend. He heard breathing next to him, and turned his head. Han was likewise awakening from his drugged state. Rashi. Goku's voice whispered up from inside him. Goku. It is good to hear your voice. The table they were on had some sort of seal on it to suppress the tailed beasts as well. Rashi, we must run. Fear was vibrating through Goku's voice. They are here. Run? Who's here? Rashi asked, shocked that his brash friend seemed to be afraid. The three generals, I can feel them. We must run. Now. Break free, my friend. I will lend you all the power I can get through this seal. We must run now. I cannot sense the beasts right now. One of Pain's bodies said aloud. The fighting still raged on, to the point where no one was even noticing the newcomers, or if they did, it was not en masse. We must get their attention. The Pains leapt back out of the city, and the orange-haired one gathered his chakra for a minute. He raised his hands towards the walls of Konoha. Shinra Tensei, he whispered. The demon General Tensei raised a struggling member of the Akatsuki clan up and bit off an arm. A swarm of bugs fell out of the body, racing away from the demon. These have good bits inside them. He munched with his mouth open, full of energy. The three of them turned and looked up at the tower in the center of the town. Did you feel that? Tensei asked. Of course we did, fool. Benisada sneered. A powerful battle rages. Let us go. They turned quickly away from the tower and stared to the west. Alarmed, as when they jumped away and high into the sky. Rashi held up Han, and together they staggered out of their dungeon and into the street. They were at the base of the new Emperor's Tower. Bodies of fallen Nin littered the ground. Rashi was bleeding profusely from escaping his restraints. The blood had slickened the metal enough for him to break his joints and slip through. He looked to the west, alarmed at what he was sensing. Han, my friend, it is time we, Grunt, disappeared. He dragged his friend as fast as he could towards the north, racing against time and towards a spy tunnel that Iwagakia had once used against Konoha. He hoped it was still there, and he hoped he would make it before. Danzo once again appeared to be unharmed. Shikamaru didn't know what jutsu he was using, but he was able to deduce certain aspects of it. It was a time reset, and it only seemed to affect him. There was battle damage to his clothes and his skin that did not always reset. From Shika's calculations, he only reset about 30 seconds back when death occurred. He also noticed an involuntary clutch twice of his right arm that was always also heavily bandaged. Whatever jutsu it was, it seemed to be tied to that as well. Lash was holding his own against both Kiba and Shino. Danzo proved to be a skilled warrior as well. He was using many techniques he should not have been able to. This lent more credibility to Shikamaru's theory that he had a Sharingan under that bandage. Hinata had taken some damage. One of her arms was held close to her body now. Shikamaru let the shadow consume him deeper. The black silhouette that he became at this level was almost crazy in a sense. He felt wild and dark. He smiled at the sensation of battle, of death. His grin in fact split his face nearly in two, so inhuman it was. He lunged towards Danzo, determined to end him. Lash's sword clashed with Shino's blades and parried them. The insect man before him was ridiculously quick and skilled with those scythes. A low growl and he narrowly ducked under a swing of the bear-like fist of the animal man who fought alongside the other one. These two were a very real threat, and he couldn't afford to hold back. As one, everyone in the room stopped fighting and looked out the balcony to the west. Shikamaru shouted at his friends, though he needn't have bothered for they were already moving. Run! As one, all the combatants in the remains of the Emperor's Tower sped out of the gaping hole in the south of the room and fled to the east. A giant chakra wave of compression rolled like a tsunami through the village of Konoha. Those fighters who were able to detect the wave before it hit were racing east away from it. Many could not move fast enough and were crushed under the weight of the jutsu or hit by the flying debris of crumbled buildings. Inexorably the wave rolled and crushed, pushing the entire village up against the cliff that still held the faces of the 4 Hokages. Screams and dust filled the air. Pain looked impassively at the destruction he just wrought. "How are we supposed to find the tail beast host in that now?" Conan asked him, frustration showing on her voice. "We won't have to," Devo Pain responded. "They will come to us. Very few would have survived that attack. The beasts would not have fallen." "Well, I still don't sense them," she grumbled. Her eyes narrowed. "I do sense something else, though. Something dark." 3 blurs landed with a giant explosion of rock and dust a few yards in front of them. As the dust settled, the demon generals glared at the 6 paths of Pain and Conan in front of them. "What's this?" Benisada snarled. "Who are you to interfere with our hunt?" Bokiosei shook his head, his fingers grasping and closing in anticipation. "Don't bother, these are dead already. No life in them, they're meat puppets." His eyes traced looked far off behind them. That is a lot of life force, so delicious." The quiet general smiled and exposed fangs beneath them. "I must have it." He disappeared in a flash. Conan shouted at the Pains. "Run! Nagato! You must argue." Tezai snapped her neck and ripped her head from her shoulders with a sickening crunch, drinking the blood that dripped down. Benisada swiped her sword in frustration, cutting all 6 Pain bodies in half, the cut bursting into a black flame that consumed the bodies. Bokiosei and his appetites. She looked back towards the rubble of Konoha. "I still sense the shards, they're somewhere far, moving further away. Heading northeast." Tezai wiped the blood from his chin. Yeah. "We'll catch up, stop whining." Bokiosei approached the tree with abandon and entered gleefully. Inside he saw a man with a multitude of spikes extruding from his body. The man was breathing heavily. He knew that the energy required to control the 6 puppets he had seen must have been draining, so he didn't exercise the caution he should have. Nagato looked up and froze Bokiosei in place, his circular ringed eyes flowing with tears. Bokiosei stood frozen in shock, unable to move as the power of the Rinnegan welded him to the spot. "Yahiko," Nagato whispered angrily. He focused his power on the demon general before him. With his avatars gone, all of the power of the Rinnegan was back under his immediate control. He had used the Deva path to lock him in place, both pushing and pulling him at the same time. Now he activated the Preta path. The demon general tried to shift in place, but all that could move was his eyes. He felt the tug at his chakra from the disabled man before him. He managed a smile. Nagato felt the power start to drain back into him, and he convulsed and coughed, racked in pain. The general was freed and chuckled while approaching. Demon chakra is heavily tainted. It has been for centuries, since before it was called chakra. When it was called Saiden, the source of all. He crouched down to lift Nagato's face up to look at him. "Those eyes are interesting. I knew a human who had them a long time ago. They'd been useful in dealing with a particular enemy. You may prove your worth to me after all." He touched Nagato on the temple and the Rinnegan user fell into a deep coma. He picked up Nagato and headed back to meet the others. Danzo, Lash and Scorpion stood on top of the stone head of the 4th Hokage surveying the destruction below them. "The leaf is no more," Danzo declared. Funnily enough, it didn't bother him that much. His goal, or so he thought, had been to make Konoha the strongest village. But he realized he transcended that ambition, and now aspired to something larger. No matter. He turned to his rude captains. "The renovations at Iwagakure are almost completed. That will serve as our citadel for the foreseeable future. We will take this entire world, one country at a time. We will unify everyone under one banner, my iron fist." He glanced back at Konoha. "There's nothing left of value here. Come." They melted back into the mountains. Shikamaru got to the bunkers where the other families had gathered. They'd heard and seen the destruction of their village, and a palpable silence hovered over the groups. Families huddled together. No one had expected today to go without casualties, but somehow they'd not expected this outcome. They had not lost the battle, but yet they'd lost everything. He found his father, and they shared a look. His father motioned with his head to the Akamachi clan. Chuji's mother was crying over his lifeless body. A victim of Scorpion's attack. Shikamaru felt the pain in his chest and he wanted to run away. One of his oldest friends was dead, thanks to his plan. This was the downside to leadership. Something he was not ready to handle. Shino and Kiba approached the camp, the wear of battle showing on their faces. Shino's armor was splattered in blood, and Kiba's hair looked wild and matted in places. The both paused to pay respects to the Akamachi clan and to honor Chuji's sacrifice. After a few minutes the clan heads began to gather. There was a dark presence in the city when the wave hit. Shino said calmly. There was a strong user outside the city who was responsible for the attack. Kiba practically growled. Shikamaru nodded. I felt both. He paused. Danzo escaped, with the majority of his forces that were stationed here. Shikaku came over. We cannot stay here. Without the walls of Konoha to protect us, we are vulnerable. And if we were to rebuild, it would take months just to get the walls up. During that time we would be open to attack. Shino chimed in. We must move, Kiba said. Even to stay here a moment longer is a risk. Which way do we go? The head of the Hyuga household asked as he came over. Danzo's forces are between us and Wave Country. Our sources say he has a large standing army readying to attack soon, Shikamaru said as he pulled out a map. He's probably taken his forces from here and headed north to Iwagakure village. Assuming he's not circling around now to wipe out our camp. That rules out trying to get to Lightning Country. He looked up at the others. We're left with two options. Sunigakure or Tengaku. The Hyuga elder balked. I do not think our alliance with Sunigakure would hold enough for them to take in this many clan members. I wouldn't if the roles were reversed. I would assume it was a trick to get inside our walls. Shikamaru rubbed his chin. The Kazekage and Naruto are friends. We may be able to appeal to him nonetheless. The journey there is a great deal easier than the one to Tengaku. He looked at the people around him. We have women and children with us. A trip across both Wind Country and the Badlands would take months. But Tengaku is far enough away that Danzo would be hard-pressed to attack us there. Not for a very long time. Time enough to regain our strength. Shikaka shook his head. We can contact both villages and see who would give us temporary refuge. We must leave this place right now. I'll send out a message to both. With a heavy weight, the former clans of Konoha walked into the forest. Shikamaru looked back once at the four faces of the previous Hokages. One day we will be back and will rebuild. I swear it. Across the world, Tengaku, 2 days later, our sources say that the survivors are heading west. Which means either they're going to Sunigake, or they're coming here. All eyes were on Naruto. Their leader for once showed no emotion on his face. In fact, if there was one word to describe him, it was impassive as stone. Like a statue. Jiraiya continued. Danzo is consolidating behind the iron gates at Iwagakure. His reach now stretches into Blood Country. Nagi glanced up startled. Where his men are claiming the mines. That money would be enough to finance his armies. Speaking of that, he also has an army gathering just outside the border of Wave Country. We estimate they will make a push across the border within the month. Jiraiya put down his paper and sat back down. The people in the room were for the most part silent. All eyes again went back to Naruto. He closed his eyes and released his clenched fists. He realized he'd been clenched so tight his fingernails had cut into his palms. Can you get to the Konoha clans? Naruto asked Jiraiya. Jiraiya nodded. In fact, everyone knew the answer to that already, but clearly Naruto needed to talk whatever idea he had out loud. Naruto continued. Suna is a safe place, safer now with Abizu and the Sandworms effectively locking off access to the desert. But it's up to Gaara if he will take them in as refugees. I'm going to go meet them and we'll see what they want to do. Also, what do we do about Danzo? I know what I'd like to do, but what do you think? He asked his friends. Eventually, Tenchi spoke up. He's going to be a problem for us. Tsunade shook her head. His army is large. And it'll only get larger if we leave him alone. Tenchi countered. Nagi spoke up. It bothers me that he's raiding the Blood Country's mines. Senji snarled. Best we kill him and end this. Naruto tilted his head and looked out the window to the tranquility of Tengaku. He didn't want to break the peace that his people here now enjoyed. Not to fight a war halfway across the world. But wouldn't that war eventually come knocking? Okay. First thing. He decided. Ollie! He grinned wildly. I offer your clan half and first selection rights on any and all loot taken from the armies of Danzo leaving the mines. Ali opened his mouth in shock and then laughed outrageously. No, you must start low and negotiate up. Otherwise the bargaining is no fun at all. Okay, 10% for you then, Naruto replied. Oh no, 50 has been promised, 50 is accepted. But in the future, let me bargain a bit. He laughed again. Danzo would be lucky to retrieve so much as a brass coin from these mines. Naruto smiled. Okay, now the army by wave, I'm open to suggestions on how to stop them? They all looked at each other. I take it you mean short of just killing them all? Tenchi asked. Naruto grimaced. If possible? Well, we have the Viper's asterisk in wave. Tenchi started slowly. What if we sent them to take out the commanders? An army can't move without a leader. If every time they select a general or as far down as captain, the Vipers can take him out, it would keep the casualties to a minimum and frustrate the army. Eventually that'll stop working though, Tsunade said. But a leaderless army can be dealt with more easily. If it comes to that, Guerrera chimed in. Naruto nodded. Let's do that. As for Danzo himself, I don't know. Let's talk to the Konoha clans first, and see what they want to do about him. Chapter 33 Ashes. The border between wind and leaf. Naruto landed softly in front of Shikamaru. The wind streams had taken himself and the team of Sakura, Hiroka and Calamity, as well as Jiraiya and Tsunade, directly to the large moving population of Konoha on the edge of the desert midway between Leaf Country and Wind Country. This was the crossroads that would decide which direction they would travel. His flame-adorned cloak fluttered in the wind, as his eyes took in the people before him. They had been hard to spot. Clearly, even though they were mostly citizens, there were enough ninja amongst them to keep them well hidden. The danger of pursuit was very real and there were at least several thousand people gathered here. He scanned their faces, recognizing most. Shikamaru had done well to save this many people. From the multitude of sad and angry faces, though, he realized that not all had been so lucky. Naruto hardly recognized Shikamaru. The teenage lout who would rather play shogi than work was long gone. This was a battle-seasoned fighter in front of him. One that Naruto knew possessed a brilliant tactical mind. It was a scary combination. In fact, he took a second harder look at all of his old friends. Kiba was massive, and feral somehow. Naruto got the sense of a wild animal guarding its pack. Shino seemed alien. Even Hinata looked more mature, ready to fight again. Yo Shika. He smiled at Shikamaru, though his smile did not reach his eyes. Shikamaru smiled back grimly. Yo Naruto. They glanced out over at the flickering sand dunes of the desert. Everyone could see a shimmering and flickering as something approached from the horizon. It had become common knowledge recently that the desert sand of Wind Country was off limits. Stories of the monsters beneath the sands that had been unleashed had spread like wildfire across the world. No physical warning signs were necessary. Everyone knew not to cross the sands unless invited. Slowly the images grew larger, and within a few minutes Gaara, his siblings, and the ancient Ebizo appeared riding one of the terrifying giant worms. They slid off and walked over to where Naruto and Shikamaru were standing as the worm rumbled and the ground shook as it disappeared. Gaara looked across at the large gathering and then back to Naruto, greeting him with a concerned look on his face. Naruto. The Tenshinhan breathed deep. He hadn't known what exactly the plan was going to be, but they had to start somewhere. Who's in charge? He asked the group in front of him. He thought he knew the answer, but it needed to be said out loud, and this was something that had to be decided before anything else. The Konoha clans looked at each other. Shikamaru is, Hayashi Hyuga said pointedly. For now. Some were surprised, none spoke differently. The Hyuga patriarch assessed the young man in front of him. The boy who had escaped Konoha was gone. The younger generation had grown in strength at an unprecedented rate, but Naruto had also grown in another way. He radiated leadership. Hayashi glanced at his daughter Hinata, frowning in thought as he saw her flushed cheeks looking at Naruto. Her infatuation with the boy was also a cause of concern for him before, but now. Naruto nodded. Good. I want to suggest an alliance between Konoha and Tengaku. Naruto continued. Danzo is not defeated, his armies grow. We need to deal with him soon, but we all must work together for that to work. I don't disagree, Shikamaru replied. Konoha the city is in ruins, but the will of the leaf lives on in us. We plan to go back when this is all over. Gaara interjected. Back from where? That is the biggest question right now. The Nin gathered rumbled anxiously. It was the question on everyone's mind. Naruto waved his hands at the gathered survivors. There are a lot of civilians here. They've no place being on the front lines. And Wind Country is the closest to Danzo. I think we should move them all to Tengaku, or a nearby village under our protection. Danzo cannot march an army across the world without us knowing. Shikamaru grimaced. That's a long travel for many of them. Naruto shook his head. No, we'll jump them closer. He winked. We have our methods. I won't ask how, yet, but what about our fighters? Shikamaru asked. We could be better served staying closer to Danzo's operations. He looked at Gaara. The Kazekage shook his head. Sunagekure is safe for now. There is a better place for your force, if you're willing. Naruto frowned, thinking quickly. That's a good idea, Gaara. But it would mean separating families. He turned to Shikamaru. If the clans are willing, we'd like to ask your help in supporting Wave Country. Danzo has an army massing on their border. We are taking certain actions. But a few more skilled fighters in the mix would help a lot. Shikamaru wasn't slow by any means. He picked up on Naruto glossing over what actions they were doing to support Wave Country. I can't force anyone to join that fight, but we can ask for volunteers, he said thoughtfully. Wave was on the opposite side of Danzo. The biggest concern strategically for them would be supply lines. In an ordinary war they'd have to rely on supplies coming via the sea, but those could be easily cut off, sealing off the country and ensuring doom. However, Tengaku's ability to seemingly fly/appear anywhere meant that Wave Country could never be isolated. It was a very desirable ally Wave had made in Naruto. Shikamaru could also see Gaara's reluctance to take in so many strange clans. It was a recipe for discord in his own city. It was possible they hoped the casualties in this battle would take care of the fighters from Konoha and remove the problem before it started. Killing two birds with one stone. It was a cynical thought. He turned to his friends. Kiba shrugged and grinned, baring his teeth. He'd love a fight. Shino adjusted his glasses in the manner that Shikamaru knew meant he was ready. We're with you, Naruto! Hinata shouted too loudly. She looked embarrassed for a second, then smiled at her friends. Sakura flashed her annoying wink and Hinata blushed bright red. Good! Naruto exclaimed. After we start evacuating the civilians, anyone who wants to go will follow me to Wave. Tengaku's Tenio team, the girls, laughed. Of course Naruto would want to go to Wave too. They'd come prepared for that eventuality, their weapons ready. Shikamaru shook his head ashamedly, embarrassed at thinking they were being sent on a suicide mission. Naruto hadn't changed completely, he was still honest and earnest. There's a possibility Danzo has a small force looking for us already, he said. We've a few clan members in the rear position looking out for them. Naruto brushed that aside. Maybe, but if so they'd be in for a surprise. He grinned and looked at Jiraiya. The Tennin laughed, and began drawing a giant rune in the ground. They prepared a portal to a valley beneath Tengaku. More permanent quarters would have to be made, but they could camp there for now while they built something in safety. 10 miles behind the Konoha refugees, the IWA Nin had little trouble following the trail left behind by the Konoha refugees. Even without Danzo's orders, this battalion of soldiers would have pursued them. Most had long memories, and there had been countless skirmishes and casualties for generations between IWA and the Leaf. Hold, the captain in charge of the group barked quietly. They were several miles away from the border of Wind Country. It had become obvious where they were headed, but you could never be sure. Now he was. He too had heard the rumors of the monsters beneath the sands. That would work to his advantage. The fools ahead would be trapped, sandwiched between his small force and the death of the sands. He anticipated they would be caught by surprise, and that the fighters amongst the group would be dispatched quickly, allowing them to slaughter the women and children that were left, removing all seeds of the cursed leaf forever. He practically salivated at the thought. So engrossed in the thought was he that he never saw the arrow that shot like lightning from the sky and entered the top of his skull and out the bottom of his jaw. Simultaneously, a streak of metal seemed to wrap like a ribbon around another soldier, and tightened in a razor-sharp tornado of steel, blood, and flesh. Azrael pulled his sword back in a swirl, his hard eyes making sure he had a clear landing spot, pumping chakra into his feet to brace for the impact. The other IWA Nin leapt away, changing positions and looking up to see 8 bodies falling towards them from out of the sky, and a large thing, with wings streaked by. Inari managed to let another arrow from his mini crossbow fly before they reached the ground, but that one missed. He cursed, knowing he'd be reminded of that miss mercilessly later. He glanced to his left. Sirin met his eyes and laughed wickedly, eliciting a groan from Inari. Sirin then curled into a ball midair and transformed into a tight ball of water. He hit the ground and splashed upwards, transforming back into himself, grabbing a soldier's head with his legs as he twisted and spun around the man's body. He landed back on the ground with a final twist and sent the man, broken neck and all, flying towards the other soldiers. Miran grabbed onto a branch and used the momentum to change course, flying perpendicular to the ground and into the chest of another soldier who almost succeeded in blocking her attack. They fell to the ground and she rolled past him, ignoring him and moving on to the 3 soldiers in front of her. They made the mistake of catching her eyes. The world froze for them and in a blink she was gone. Her metal gauntlets smashed the first one on the temple before he could blink again. Genesuk fell with precision through the branches of a large tree, twisting and shifting so slightly that it would seem he didn't move at all, but in fact he was avoiding every branch, finding every hole. He touched so slightly one branch, shifted direction, another, and again. His descent slowed to a manageable rate and flipped once more, leaving the canopy of the tree. A Nin who was traversing the trees as well appeared before him. Jen sensed his movement. Every time he had touched a branch or leaf he had sent out pulses of chakra, enough to see. His eskrima sticks were out in a flash from their carrier behind his jacket. With a flick and accuracy only his unseeing eyes could achieve, his right eskrima stick slipped through the Nin's defenses and crushed the man's nose, driving the bone into his brain. A geyser of blood erupted onto him. The remaining soldiers recovered quickly. These were no low-level hoods. They were seasoned fighters and had fought in many battles. The second in command recognized the winged armbands of the children before him. Note, they are currently teenagers. Children is meant derogatorily. These were warriors from Tengaku, and judging from reports he'd read, these were the Tendu. He took note of them quickly. White clothes, currently 2 of them covered in the blood of his dead soldiers. Clearly no mercy was given or expected. They had acquired another name from rumors he'd heard about their methods, and the way they looked after a battle. The blood children, he growled. A series of hand signals and his men counterattacked. Swords and shuriken were unleashed, while 3 fighters held back, and together sent a wall of earth and boulders rising towards the attacking Tendu. However, the ground rumbled louder than it should have. 5 enormous white rhinos burst out of the forest, rocketing towards the IWA Nin. They plowed through the wall of earth in an explosion of dust and rocks and trampled several soldiers beneath their feet on their way through the ranks. They didn't turn and attack again, instead continuing in a straight line into the forest and disappearing. We need to work on controlling them, Junya said sheepishly as he and Fuki ran into the small clearing created by the battle thus far. Genesuk smiled, his unseeing eyes crinkling. He stamped his foot on the ground, letting a chakra wave flood the area. Using this technique, he could see where everyone and everything was. He twirled the eskrima sticks in his hands, flicking off the blood from his last attack and rested them on his shoulders, breathing in deep. There were still more than 20 skilled ninjas in front of them, and they'd lost the element of surprise, but still he smiled. After all, they hadn't come alone. From the sky 4 other shadows fell to the ground in front of the Tendu in an explosion of stone and dust. The menacing figure of Kakashi, his right hand already crackling with electricity, peered through the smoke. Tenshi Shiratori stood like a coiled spring waiting, his hand hovering over the hilt of his sword. The enormous form of Guerrera took a step forward out of their landing spot. Yo yo yo, the 4th figure spoke rhythmically as the dust settled as well, brushing his shoulders free of dirt. What a way to go! I had no idea about the sky roads of Tengoku. High in the sky like a bird on high. It's Tengaku, Tenshi corrected him. Man, don't interrupt, this place right here about to erupt. Killer Bee adjusted his sunglasses. He had come to Tengaku to meet Naruto and talk an alliance with Kumogakure. He'd liked what he'd seen in the boy and the city. They'd instantly clicked. With him joining this fray, and helping the refugees from Konoha escape, their pact would be solidified. It was a natural fit anyway, the village hidden by clouds and the heaven village. He drew his swords. My wicked styles are brand new, and my 6 sword skills will surprise you. He pointed his swords to the current de facto leader of the IWA Nin and burst forward to attack. The warriors of Tengaku likewise rushed forward. Kakashi disappeared with a crackle, his Chidori taking the heads of 2 soldiers and cleanly separating them from their bodies, cauterizing the wounds instantaneously. 3 IWA Nin used Earth Jutsu to open a hole that swallowed the giant Guerrera and closed up above him. His hand burst through the ground and pulled his frame out from the rocks that had tried to crush him. His white luchador mask looking like a massive skeleton had emerged from a grave. His speed belied his size, and he grabbed the first man and flung him full speed backwards towards his protege Sirin. Sirin jumped into a dropkick, snapping the man's head backwards with enough force to hear the crack of his neck as his body collapsed like a rag doll. Tenchi was low to the ground running. He drew his sword in a quick upright motion aiming for the leg of one of the soldiers. He was parried by the soldier's own katana, but the force of his blow spun the soldier sideways. Enough for one of Inari's crossbow bolts to lodge itself in his neck. Tenchi just kept going forward, into the bulk of the collapsing platoon. Killer Bee was in full-on acrobat attack. His sword seemed to reach out everywhere. Screams of anguish and fear started to fill the clearing. Battles are a lot shorter than stories make them out to be. This one in particular was over in less than 10 seconds. The warriors from Tengaku stood victorious. Guerrera had a few cuts. One looked nasty, but he gave no sign of having felt it. Kakashi was unscathed, as was Tenchi. Killer Bee, however, was kneeling, clutching his. "My sunglasses are shattered, as if they never, even, mattered," he lamented. The Tengaku elders grinned. This fighter from Kumogakure fit right in with them. This alliance would do well. This fight wasn't in keeping with Naruto's last conversation with them, that he would try to avoid killing people. But that was his decision, not theirs. Each fighter had to decide his own methods. The Tendu also checked each other for any serious injuries, all glad to have survived another encounter. "I'm glad we're all okay," Genesik said. "Okay? We're better than okay," Sirin almost shouted. "Didn't you hear them?" "Hear?" started Fuki. "What?" finished Junya. "He called us the Blood Children." Sirin laughed. "What a sick-ass name." Somewhere in Wind Country, Senji had no expression on his face as his blade moved on its own. He no longer tried to will it to block or parry or attack. His mind registered the forms effortlessly from within the void, but his body did them automatically. Apple blossoms in the wind, kingfisher circles the pond, the lion springs, leopards caress, cutting the clouds. Back and forth he and Sujiro circled the garden that had become his training ground. A gust of wind blew up a small dervish of dust that danced around their feet. Senji had lost track of time, not knowing for how long they'd been in this particular battle. His body was caked with sweat and dust, but he paid it no attention. Every detail of his opponent's body was being scrutinized for movement. Anything that would telegraph the next move. The slightest of muscle twitches on Sujiro's right shoulder, and they clashed again. And again. And again. "Enough," Sujiro said calmly as he lowered his sword. The noonday sun glistened off it, and it seemed to wink at him in amusement. "Your swordsmanship has improved. You learn fast and have a natural gift," Sujiro continued. "I would consider you almost ready to be called a blade master." He took a step backwards. "There are 2 more steps you need to take to achieve that name." He pointed his sword at Senji. "Your twin Shodai are fantastic weapons, but you do not know them," he declared with a frown. Senji looked at his blades. He knew every inch of their surface. He'd spent countless hours polishing, sharpening. He fingered them lightly. "I know them very well," he declared. Sujiro shook his head. "No. Have you met them?" He turned his own sword so the flat side of the blade was facing upwards. "This blade's name is Shiryu. It has an interesting history. It has survived a world before this world. It is incredibly old, but it can never rust, can never dull. You must discover your blades. This is the first real step to learning who you are." Sujiro smiled. "The next step after that is to become more than who you are, of course." Senji frowned. "How do I do that?" "Well, here's where it gets to be fun." Sujiro bent and plucked an iridescent blue flower from his garden. "Fun for me anyway. You? Not so much." A short time later. "Now breathe it in," Sujiro commanded Senji. The lidded box in front of him had been filled with petals from that blue flower, and then crushed, and boiling water thrown in with it, and sealed for an hour. Now both Senji and Sujiro sat on either side of the box inside Sujiro's home on the ground. Senji was wary but followed his teacher's command. Within seconds his head began to swirl, and his eyes squeezed shut. He fell backwards and writhed violently for a few seconds. Sujiro shifted the box away, making sure to close the lid and watch Senji's body calm down and remain perfectly still. Now follow the path before you, find your fears and face them. Learn your swords and learn yourself. Life is a dream from which we all must wake before we can dream again. If you survive the world of dreams, you'll evolve. Senji sat up in a place that looked like a washed-out version of the real world. All the colors were slightly duller. There was no wind, no smells. Nothing beyond what he could see and touch. Well, this is new. Tengaku, Nagi felt it. It felt like a lump. Gingerly he touched the bump on the top of his head from where Noik had whacked him with his fist. He knew it was an admonishment, and if it had been a serious punch he'd probably be brain dead already. He looked down again to where his arm used to be. He could still feel it. The phantom limb. All the practice, all the work he and Noik had been putting into expanding his powers. He had hit a wall and didn't know where to go from here. Noik was a skilled master, but Nagi felt that without someone who was skilled in his particular type of jutsu, shadows, he'd get nowhere fast. The fact that Naruto had to tell him to stay and train more, instead of taking him on their latest excursion, rankled even more than the lack of progress. He knew he was useless in a real fight right now, he didn't need to be reminded of it. And who knew where that goddamn Senji had gone off to? Tenchi had been cryptic about his whereabouts. Hey Nagi. Mabry walked over. It had been a while since Nagi had seen Mabry. The once trader had taken it upon himself to improve the commerce and organizing the trading village that appeared below Tengaku. The village that disappeared was flourishing and prospering. Traders and merchants now came from far and wide to buy from the artisans of Tengaku. There had been a lot of skilled craftsmen and tradespeople Naruto had taken in. Refugees. They had wasted no time in setting up shops again and making goods of the highest quality. Something about being here made people want to do better. To be better. The refugees from Konoha will be arriving soon at the land gate, Mabry said to him. The land gate was a place they'd created below the actual entrance to Tengaku. Instead of teleporting people directly into the city itself, like they did when they left the burning castle, this teleport gate would ensure they got to do a secondary check on people before letting them inside. I'm coming. Nagi stood up and put his stump behind his back. Instantly he was ashamed of this. As if he was hiding. Mabry didn't even glance at it. But he did crease his brow slightly. He didn't say a word though, and they left to jump into a wind stream that would take them to the gate. The Konoha refugees appeared in family groups at the symbol carved into the stone. After getting their bearings, each group was moved immediately off the stone and directed towards tents that a slew of Tengaku residents had volunteered to erect. There were Naruto clones scattered throughout, assisting where they could. It was a very organized, yet chaotic scene at the same time. The area was growing more and more massive, and the influx of people didn't seem like it would ever end. Mabry and Nagi stood at the gate, more overseeing things and as security, so to speak. There were a few other academy students also standing around, in case any enemies appeared. Mabry, is it? A man walked up to where Mabry and Nagi were standing. I'm Shikaka Nara. He extended his hand. Mabry took it warmly. I know who you are, Shikaku. I've been waiting to talk to you. Perhaps when the exodus is over and all the people of Konoha are settled into their temporary tents, you and I can talk. Shikaka nodded. Of course. So these tents are temporary then? I have to admit I expected more when I heard stories of Tengaku. He glanced at the expanse of rocks and mountains behind them, and the clearing where the tents were being set up. Mabry laughed. On the other side of that mountain over there you'll find the disappearing trading village. If you've heard of it? We wanted to keep your people away from it for now and any prying eyes. We have merchants from all over the world trading there, and we want to keep Konoha's people secret for a bit longer. He smiled wider. But that's not Tengaku though. He pointed straight up. Shikaku followed his finger and saw only clouds. Up there. That's Tengaku. And we were asked to keep your people here safe until Naruto and the council returned from Wave. Shikaku shrugged. Okay, we'll see. What did you want to talk about? The clans are moving their people orderly enough, they don't need my help. Mabry thumbed towards a very startled Nagi. I want you to sit with Nagi here for a bit. I think you'll find you've a lot to talk about. The last of the Konoha refugees had vanished through the scroll marks, so the warriors that were left turned their attention to the next task at hand. Rejoining the wind streams was a new knowledge that the mad scientist Yoshi had discovered. Using a smaller version of the Deadless, the warriors of Tengaku only needed to run into a headwind and lift off the ground. This got them airborne. Once there, Naruto could sense where the rivers of wind were and guide them there. A scroll produced enough smaller Deadless nicknamed doves for the white material used for the wings for the Tengaku fighters, and a couple larger ones to carry the Konoha nin. Shino fingered the wings of the Deadless curiously as Sakura explained it all. I'm not going on that. Kiba growled, taking one, then 2 steps backwards. Come on, Kiba. His older sister slapped him on his back. She used to be taller than him, now he towered over her. Where's your spine? If these guys can do it, our clan is more than brave enough to. Kiba snarled at her, and didn't move an inch, his eyes darting to the contraption. No. Akamaru sat behind him with his tongue out, unconcerned. Hey big guy. Calamity strode forward. I'm nervous about these things too. Here, she removed a pouch at her waist and took a drink from it, then passed it to Kiba. Have some of this, it helps. Trust me. She smiled with a wink. She reached out and stroked Akamaru's ears, the huge wolf dog reaching her at shoulder height even when sitting. Kiba felt no threat from this woman. He grabbed it from her and glared at his sister while pouring the liquid down his throat. He pulled it away and wiped his chin, handing it back. With a smile, Calamity took the pouch and poured the rest out into the dirt. Kiba watched in confusion, but then realization hit and he growled. He took 1 step towards Calamity, then fell forward unconscious. Hey, what did you do? Kiba's sister shouted angrily. Her clan's fighters were bristling. Relax, he's just asleep for the trip. She palmed some ninja sleeping tablets to show them. She had slipped a few into the canteen before handing it to the distracted Kiba, hoping that he would not detect the odorless, tasteless pills. Sakura put her hands on her hips and tilted her head. How are we going to lift him into the Deadless, Calamity? Calamity blinked. Hadn't thought of that. Naruto came over and looked at the huge sleeping mass of Kiba and the still unconcerned Akamaru. The wolf dog knew these were friends. Calamity pushed the hair out of Kiba's face. Handsome, she said quietly with a smile. Well, I'll send some clones to take these two to wave over the land route. We'll Hiroishin the whole way. He scratched behind his head thinking. They won't last the whole way with that weight. Might have been easier if he was awake. Calamity. She shrugged with a wide not sorry grin. Tsunade chimed in. Send some other clones to switch out, so when one set dissipates the others can just take over. Naruto smiled at that. Perfect. With a quick hand sign, he'd made 8 shadow clones. 2 picked up Kiba, while 2 others approached and tried to find a good way to pick up Akamaru, but could find no good way to do it. If only I was bigger, Naruto whispered. He looked at the sleeping body of Kiba. I know what to do. The clones huddled together, talked heatedly for a minute, then one got on another's back. I know what he's going to do, Sakura exclaimed knowledgeably. He'll use transformation to become big like Kiba so he can carry Akamaru on his back. Calamity and Tsunade nodded in agreement. That made sense. Naruto examined his 2 clones, nodded and stepped back. In one voice, the 2 clones shouted together in unison, Sexy Giant and Ojutsu. In a puff of smoke, in place of the 2 Narutos stood a 12-foot-tall voluptuous woman with non-proportional giant breasts, scantily clad in furs. Sakura, Calamity, and Tsunade exclaimed in anger and surprise. I'm not great at the body transformation, Naruto said sheepishly. This technique works every time, plus this giant version of it is a new level of jutsu. Jiraiya had spouted a small stream of blood from his nose, and walked over wiping it. This is a good idea, Naruto. Smart use, great problem solving. Tsunade bashed him over the head. Sexy Giant Naruto picked up Akamaru and nodded at the 2 holding Kiba, the 4 spares also confirming their readiness. They all turned to face east and vanished, appearing a mile away, then vanishing again out of sight. Okay, Naruto said loudly. Everyone else on the Deadless. Time to move. He made another 2 clones who would be responsible for piloting the large Deadless, while he himself and his team donned the doves. They ran a few steps into the headwinds, and the wings lifted them off the ground like kites. They circled higher and higher. They were joined in the air by the Tendu squad: Genesuk, Mirun, Sirin, Inari, Junya and Fuki, Kakashi, Tenshi and Guerrera. Killer Bee had opted to head home to update his brother and people. Naruto could feel the wind stream above them and to the right, so he guided the group in that direction. The second they hit the stream, instead of a slow glide, they moved as if shot out of a cannon, picking up immense speed and careening east towards Wave. Nagato, pain, woke slowly. He could not feel his paths. That shared control he'd exercised for so long was gone. He groaned and turned his head. His eyes had been covered with a cloth, so he could see nothing. His wrists and legs were bound, and he was on a soft surface, leaves it felt like. Bokyosiai's voice echoed. "Ah, you're awake. Good." Nagato felt a kick against his ribs. "You caused us a setback, foolish human." A female voice barked at him. "Calm down, Benisada. We know where the shards are roughly, we'll catch them." Another male voice said very matter-of-factly. Nagato wasn't sure what was going on, but it appeared they'd underestimated him. His hands were behind his back, bound, and his legs were also tied. His eyes were covered, but he was still alive, and still wielded immense power. His body was not able to move very well and hadn't been able to for very many years. But he could move enough to summon, he figured. These bastards had destroyed his path bodies. Yahiko. What about Conan? Was she alive still? I sense you have many questions, human. I've no problem answering them for you. You see, you have a skill that we could use. And if you don't use it for us, that's fine too, you'll be a tasty meal. Bokyosiai laughed at his own words. We're hunting the pieces of an old enemy. They were broken up a long time ago, each one becoming its own self-aware entity. Pathetic versions of their former self. Our mother, in her infinite wisdom, had made this enemy of ours out of pure demonic chakra and could never be really destroyed. Some human came along, with eyes like yours you see, and helped him escape Lord Magnus by splitting him into smaller shards, you could call them. The tails. Nagato whispered. He felt something in his hands that wasn't there a minute ago. A small piece of paper had flitted into his palm on the breeze. She's alive. Yes, the tailed beasts as you humans call them. Bokyosiai brushed him aside. The main shard seems to reside inside a very powerful human as well. We can smell him sometimes, mixed in with Kyuubi's scent. All over this damn country. Funny though, now that I think about it, he smells kind of like you. Nagato could feel Bokyosiai's breath near his face. You must be kin. He sniffed again, closer. Yes, I think so. Wait. Do you sense that? The female one exclaimed again in excitement. Yes. The main shard. Kyuubi! Bokyosiai responded. It's moving east of us now. It was west of us not long ago. How is it moving so fast? No matter, the deep-voiced one growled. We must go. I'll take the human, let's get on the move. Nagato felt himself lifted, and then moving with speed. He allowed himself a small smile. His chance would come. Plus, Conan was out there watching him as well, every trace of her presence masked. A lifetime in war had taught them both the same thing. Patience. Sasuke leaned against a tree. Kabuto had disappeared after he'd defeated the white-scaled snake. It had taken a lot out of him, though. His wounds weren't healing. It had been 3 days since the battle, and that one on his left side was still red, felt hot, and had gotten blistery. He knew enough to know it was infected. Curse that Orochimaru and his cursed blade. He needed a doctor. The closest village to Konoha was still a day's journey away at this speed. If only Kabuto was still around, he could make him. Sasuke collapsed onto the dirt and didn't move. From trees 2 figures came out, and one bent over him. The other stood guard impatiently. Either kill him or pick him up, I've never liked these woods. Itachi didn't bother to respond to Kisame. He turned Sasuke over and checked his wounds. He's lost a lot of blood. I'll have to carry him. You! Kisame scoffed. He came over and picked up Sasuke like he was no heavier than a backpack. You'd trip over your own feet with any weight on your shoulders. Seriously, you should eat more. Together the two of them melted back into the forest. Senjie walked for what seemed like an eternity in the washed-out world. It looked very much like the real world, with places he recognized. Certain landmarks he remembered passing on his way to meet Sujiro. But this world felt stale and off, and he had yet to see a single living creature. Not a bird, not an insect. Nothing. There was dead silence that threatened to stifle him. Not even a breeze stirred the hair on his head. He had followed the road up to this point, and felt drawn towards a canyon up ahead and to the left. It was as good a destination as any. Sujiro had not prepared him for any of this. Minutes later, he stood in the center of a high canyon, looking up at the walls that loomed over him. Took your time getting here. A strong voice barked behind him. Senji swiveled and reached for his swords. They weren't there. He was sure they were in their scabbards all this time. So where? He finally saw the man in front of him. An older man wearing blacksmith clothes. His muscles were hard, much like Guerrera's, but not as hard as his face. What is this? Senji asked. You've had this for so long, yet don't know anything at all, do you? The blacksmith said, shifting slightly and showing one of Senji's kodachi grasped low. As he did that, Senji heard a shuffling behind him again, and turned his head to see an older woman, holding his other sword. Those are mine, he said plainly, his eyes narrowing. Foolish boy, the woman replied. So young and arrogant. Her voice cracked into him like a whip. Senji couldn't help but feel like he'd met these two before. One cannot own real blades. You work with them, become one with them. The old woman disappeared, and reappeared inches from his face. The kodachi in her hands impaled his left arm. Simultaneously he took his eyes off the old man, who likewise appeared behind him, and thrust his blade into Senji's right arm. He tried to move, but found his legs would not respond. His mouth moved, but he could make no sound. Come on, boy, the old man said calmly. You earned the right to wield us. Now earn your mastery of us. Senji's eyes widened as realization hit him. These two were the spirits of Ganjiang and Moe. The couple that had sacrificed their bodies and souls to forge these swords. He felt the pain of the blades in his arms, but could not move. He remembered the trial he had to undergo to be able to get the twin kodachi in the first place. Sacrifice. But this test, and he was sure it was a test, seemed to be different. One with the blade. That phrase stuck out in his head. Well, they were embedded in him, so couldn't be much more part of him than that. With a twist and thud, he was on his back. The couple had vanished, but his arms were now outstretched, impaled into the ground by his own swords. He turned his head, glad to be able to move that much again. No one was around. Foothills of Tengaku. The night grew cold in the shadow of the mountain. Nagi sat on the ground and exhaled, frustrated while listening to Shikaku recite the same things again. Your skill set is a branch of our shadow arts. You travel the shadow to an extent we've not done in generations. However, there are basics that we teach that you've not learned yet. The shadow can be used by you. For more than just traveling. He pushed his hands together in a series of signs, and the flames of the fire made his shadow dance. Then Shikaku's shadow moved away from the flame and picked up a stick, throwing it into the fire. Shikaku admitted to himself that he was shocked to find a shadow user all the way here on the other side of the world. But he adapted quickly. It made sense, his clan had been around for hundreds of years. Not all of it in Konoha. He had not known about the blood country connection before, but it didn't matter. What he saw before him proved it. This young man was connected to his clan. How am I supposed to do hand seals without a hand? Nagi spat out angrily, earning him a rap on the head from Nick. Mind your tongue, apprentice, or I will remove that as well. The master of Senanju pronounced menacingly. He would not be embarrassed by his student in front of a lowly clan leader. On one hand, the Shadow clan leader seemed knowledgeable and patient. On the other, Nook rankled at having another master instruct his student. His bad mood was not improving because of this. Shikaku scratched at his beard. Well, not all need use hand signs, he explained. The signs mostly just focus our intent. You don't use it when you sink into the shadows. He pointed at the shadows dancing in front of the fire. When you reach a point where you can almost feel those shadows, then you'll be ready to work on controlling them. And then, maybe, as your goal is, to shape them. Nagi stared at the flames and the shadows, his eyes watering. I'm sorry. I'm grateful you are trying to help. Please forgive my words. Nook nodded in approval. You will stay here without food and water until you attain this awareness as the Shadow Clan Master has instructed apprentice. His steely voice offered no room for negotiation. Shikaku stopped himself from contradicting the small master's words. He knew enough to know this little man was beyond lethal and any words against would be an insult. He just nodded and walked off to go talk to his clan members about Nagi. Nagi stared into the darkness, intent on the shadows dancing around the flames. He could not feel anything, but this was a path, some hope. He kept staring unblinking and did not notice when Nook slipped away. Wave Country. The entire contingent from Tengaku and Konoha landed carefully in the middle of Wave's village in the middle of the night. While flying over, Tsunade had seen the shadows of the amassed force below. They numbered in the thousands. She had had no idea that Danzo possessed that many soldiers. Wave's defenses seemed weak in comparison. The great Naruto bridge still stood. Rows and rows of blockades lined it. Beyond it on the forest side were positions she could see where battles had raged. The forest had if she had to guess, one more massive push from Danzo's forces would overrun the bridge and the town. Naruto strode away from the Daedalus machines after making sure all his friends were safe from the flight. Shikamaru looked pale, but Shino on the other hand seemed to be in ecstasy, and was uncharacteristically effusive. Flying! Like true insects. How glorious! They were met by the mayor, Lord Gama, who was outfitted in battle-scarred armor. He quickly gave them a rundown of their defenses. The three warriors they'd met last time they were here, Takada, Masahiro, and Mizurai, were positioned at the front lines. There were 3 members of Tengaku that Naruto was most interested in seeing though. Where are the Vipers? He asked Lord Gama. Lord Gama grinned mightily. Those heroes of yours are out again. It's night and that's when they do their hunt. I tell you, if it wasn't for them we'd have been overrun a month ago. Tell me more. Naruto asked, happy to hear his former teacher was doing well. He remembered how he'd found Irika-sensei, and Enko. He bit down the rising rage at that memory and looked at the mayor, who mistook his hard eyes for anger at his response. Well, see, they'd been targeting any leaders above a certain rank. At this point they've together killed upwards of 40 leaders in the invading army. They strike at night, and they never miss. We've captured a few enemy combatants, and they say the nighttime raids are keeping them ragged. Good, Tsunade said as she walked over. She remembered the last battle they had here and didn't want a repeat of that much loss. You captured someone, you said? She led the mayor off to take her to the prisoners. Inari looked around at his old village. He remembered every street, every house. Nothing much had changed. Except the faces of the people. They all looked tired. He noticed some families seemed to be missing 1 or 2 members. Naruto saw his face and understood what he was thinking. Naruto vowed to himself quietly, he would not let this war continue. An hour past midnight, 3 figures in black slipped back into the village along paths only they knew. The council of Tengaku was waiting for them. Asuma! Hi there. Jiraiya waved the son of the 5th Hokage over. The 3 of them wore variations of their previous outfits, but all very dark green. Black was actually not the best color for night word, as even at night pure black stood out. They all wore a custom symbol on their right arm. Jiraiya admired the artwork and wondered who had designed it. The wings of Tengaku, with the Konoha leaf between the upper tips, and the head of a viper beneath them. The symbol of the Viper team who want to reclaim Konoha with the power of Tengaku behind them. Irika made a hand sign that meant nice to see you guys. Enko just nodded with a small grin. It had been a good night's work, her sword would need to be properly cleaned. They sat down to listen to the council as they were getting started on the plans for the day. The news isn't good. Asuma started. We've been working on their squad leaders and commanders. But in the past few days the size of the army has grown from a few hundred to a few thousand. Many are roaming bands of marauders conscripted by Danzo's army. Some are a type of clay clone that stink of Orochimaru's work. Enko spat on the ground. They're tough to kill but possible. That army is massive, Tsunade stated. Much larger than the last force we repelled. You should have destroyed the bridge, Kakashi said matter-of-factly. Never. The great Naruto bridge is a source of our pride, the mayor shouted. Naruto smiled in embarrassment. Actually, I have a suggestion. All eyes went to him. This island is your home, like Konoha was once mine. But, he looked around. It's time to leave it behind for now. There was a litany of shouting from the representatives of Wave Country. Even Inari was shocked by his Kage's words. He's right. Shikamaru chimed in. There are several thousand soldiers amassed to invade. You've done amazingly to keep the forces that were there before at bay, but you've faced losses. And you're not an army. Naruto nodded. Even with us here, there will be more loss of life. Danzo will be defeated, but this should not be your villagers' and families' price to pay. Silence greeted that statement for a minute. What do you suggest? Lord Gamma asked in defeat. There are boats in the harbor. Evacuate. There are 2 places you can go. Either to Crescent Moon Country. Or. He looked around the room and pulled out an old parchment. He unraveled it so that everyone could see. A murmur went through the room. It was a world map. What in blazes? Tenchi shouted in disbelief. World maps hadn't been seen in so long they were thought to be no more in existence. Naruto grinned. Remember, Tengaku is where all things go in the end. A shadow crossed his eyes. Someone told me that a very long time ago. I found this a while back. He pointed to the map. Here is Tengaku, roughly. I mean, it's not actually on the map. They all craned to see. I've gone ahead and drawn in the lines for where I think the current countries are. Some of the names have changed, but the sizes look about right. He continued. And here is where we are right now. His finger pressed the shape that was Wave Country. There are many islands between here. He traced a line across the ocean to Tengaku. And here. But there's a tiny island right here, just north of Tengaku off the cast of our new country. I don't believe it's inhabited. They could see the pen marks on the map that Naruto had made, looking fresher than the original drawings on the map. How do you know that, Naruto? Jiraiya asked. Naruto shrugged. One of my clones took the wrong stream once. Ended up there. There's a stream that flies directly over it and around a peak. I didn't see any villages. Lord Gamma looked incredulously at the map. He'd never seen one. They had fishing maps, of course, but no one had traveled enough to cartograph the entire world, no one he knew of anyway. He studied the route carefully. There are too many villagers here to take via our airways. The only way out is by fleet. After that, the decision is yours. I'm sure Crescent Moon will take you in. Naruto explained more. Shikamaru studied the interaction carefully. He'd not witnessed this side of Naruto before. The leader, the diplomat. What had he been through to grow this much? Of course, whichever way you decide to go, we will escort you. Naruto smiled. We're not setting you adrift to fend for yourself. I'd also cover your escape. They all began quietly talking amongst themselves about the options. Naruto hoped no one noticed his slip about being the one to cover their retreat. One look around at the disapproving looks of Sakura and Jiraiya told him otherwise. We will meet to discuss this, Lord Tenshinkichi, Lord Gamma declared. We appreciate all Tengaku has done to protect us this much. With that, the village council separated from the Tengaku contingent to discuss matters. Sakura walked over calmly and smacked Naruto on the arm. Ow! He winced as he rubbed. Baka. You will not be covering anyone's retreat alone. She shook her head and left the building with Calamity and Haruka. Naruto smiled. He was glad they were here, but he missed his friends Nagi and Senjai. He wondered what they were doing now. World of Dreams, what the hell am I supposed to do now? Senji bellowed. He had not been able to move from the ground, his arms remained pinned by his blades. It had felt like a day, maybe more. He stared up at the sky. One with the blades. One with the blades. Well, one, this was positive. He'd lost all feeling in his arms, so that was a positive thing. At least he wasn't in pain anymore. Master Senjai? A voice asked him. He lifted his chin and saw a boy a few years younger than him standing nearby. Senjai couldn't place his name, but he knew he'd seen his face before. Suddenly it clicked. Yum? See Rogue Wave, Chapter 22. Senjai remembered him as a boy from Wave Village. He had the ability to invade others' dreams. What are you doing here, Master Senjai? Yum looked around nervously. He looked a bit older, a bit more battle-hardened than when Senjai had first met him. It's not safe to dwell in Tel'aran'rhiod for too long. Tell a what? Senjai strained his neck to see Yum better. He looked slightly unreal, almost not wholly there. I'm doing training, if you can believe it. He glanced down at the swords in his arms. These are part of my training. These what? Yum looked confused. You should leave as soon as you can, Master Senjai. There are others who cross the world of dreams. Monster, wolf, and man. Thanks, Yum. How's Wave? Senji asked. The ridiculousness of his position during their conversation not lost on him. Lord Naruto is here. The masters of Tengaku as well. There are thousands of invaders on the border. I do my part invading their dreams, troubling them. It's not much, but it's all I can do. Yum shrugged. I overheard the council. We may be abandoning Wave soon, heading out to sea. Senji frowned. Things must be bad if Naruto is there, and they're still talking about fleeing. He needed to go to his friend. Quickly. Thanks, Yum. You be careful now. Let Naruto know I'm coming. Senji smiled at the boy, who gave a half smile back and disappeared. Of course, I don't know how I'm going to get there. He said to no one in particular. Or how I'm even going to get off this ground. Senji scowled. Yum seemed confused about the swords in his arms. These what? He looked again. What exactly was holding him back? He closed his eyes. It was the third night that Nagi fell off the rock as he fought off sleep. He had stared into the darkness surrounding the fire constantly, not eating, only allowed water by Nook, who would come and say nothing but add wood to the fire and leave. It had become more than a test for his master, it was now a point of pride. If he failed in this simple test, he would bring shame to Master Nook. Of course, the added pressure didn't help at all. Nagi was exhausted, irritable. He didn't feel any different now than before he started. He stared in intense dislike at the shadows again. He could jump into them and travel, but no one had ever taught him that. He just knew he could do it. Probably learned it before he could remember walking. He wasn't sure. The shadows flickered and danced. He moved his fingers and hands in time to the flickering shadows, waving this way and that. Just mindlessly keeping time with it. The noises from the encampment were soft and waning. Most of the refugees from Konoha had gone to sleep. He could hear the movement of some of the men of the camp as they took turns on guard duty. They knew it wasn't necessary. The Tengaku Academy was using guarding the camp as a training exercise. He was also pretty sure there were a few Naruto clones hovering around still. He angrily cleared his thoughts. His eyes were now painful to keep open. He realized he was sitting on the ground after falling from the rock, and dusted his clothes in frustration and shifted back onto the rock. Thank goodness Master wasn't here to see that display of weakness. Are you certain this is the only way? Noik asked from the shadows. My pupil is at his limit. Yes, Shikaku replied. They watched carefully and far enough away to be unheard. He's too old to learn using traditional methods. He needs to reach near insanity and break through the barrier of his age and knowledge. So you said? Noik replied. I judge the preparation time to be sufficient now. Let us begin. With that, Noik stepped forward. Wriggling worm. Noik's voice was full of disdain as he approached Nagi. You bring shame to Senanju. Shame to the greatest martial art that has ever existed, and its current poor master. Nagi shook his head, too tired to even respond. Is this the limits of your skill? The limits of your resolve? Noik continued berating him. You are not worthy of the gifts you've been given. Far less any more that you already have. Nagi had almost expected this reaction for his failure thus far, but it still hit him like a ton of bricks. He was tired, hungry, and mentally just couldn't take it anymore. I lost my hand, he shouted back to Master Noik. I've not slept in days. This is impossible. I cannot learn this. His voice raised and got louder until he was almost shrieking. Noik sneered. Cannot. You are no pupil of mine. This shame is unbearable. I will remove your existence from the world to restore the sun arts to its glory. He stepped towards Nagi, radiating killing intent. Nagi stumbled backwards, too tired to sink into the shadows to run. He saw death approaching him, and his fear rose up and overpowered him. No! He shouted. He raised his hands, and the shadows he was playing with earlier raised up into a wall to protect him, shielding him from the killing intent of Nook. Good! His master shouted from the other side of the wall. Nagi stared incredulously at the impenetrable black shadow between himself and Nook. It fell away immediately like tendrils of black smoke, to reveal Nook, smiling. Shikaku stepped out of the shadows, his hands clapped together. You did it! He smiled and clapped Nagi on the shoulders, helping him to his feet. We've never had to teach someone your age how to use shadow technique before. His grin was unapologetic. Nagi nodded numbly. Noik turned to Shikaku. Now that my student has broken this barrier, What training will be next? Shikaku scratched his beard. Well, there are exercises he can do. Of course, he needs to tap into the feeling of what just happened and be able to call the shadow at will. They turned to Nagi, but the boy was asleep on his feet. Rooted in the ground as Nuik had taught him, unmovable, but fast asleep. Nuik nodded in approval and removed his own cloak, draping it over his pupil, leaving him standing there, dead to the world. The real training could wait till dawn. The world of dreams, one with my swords. One with my swords. They're a part of me. Part of me. No. No. They are me. I am them. He felt his arms again. He looked and saw no blood, no wound, no swords. But he knew the answer now. I am the sword. He remembered the makers of the swords, the sacrifices. What it took. No. Not I am the sword. He stood up and shouted into the wind. We are the sword. His arms outstretched. His twin kodachi were back in his hands, no, part of his hands, extensions of his body. He felt their power coursing through him. Different than before. This was not their power any longer, it was his power. Life and death. His left kodachi could heal, his right could kill with a scratch. Things he never knew about them, he now understood. He investigated the blades and saw the reflections of Gonjiang and Moe in the steel. Part of him forever. Senjai woke up. The decision to leave was agreed upon fairly quickly 2 days ago. Naruto and his forces has bought them time to prepare and pack, and now tonight was the night. All the ships were full. The convoy was ready to set sail. There were 10 ships in total. The experienced sailors amongst them had taken stock of Naruto's maps with glee. Most of their maps only extended to the land of water. Beyond that they knew nothing. Now they had a bearing and a destination. They estimated the journey would take a month. Jiraiya and Tsunade had made the necessary arrangements for protecting the ships. The majority of the forces from Konoha would split up across the ships, with Kakashi and the Vipers acting as defensive commanders. Naruto and the main forces from Tengaku would stay behind and leave a parting gift for the forces from Danzo. Grimly, Lord Gamma stood on the bow of the lead ship. He shouted into a megaphone to the other ships. People of Wave, good morning. In a few minutes, our ships will join together in the largest exodus in the history of our people. Citizens. That word should have new meaning for us here today. We leave behind the only home we've ever known, and sail to a new land. We run today, not from tyranny or oppression, but annihilation. We are fighting for our right to live, to exist. We have seen enough war for now. And, as we set sail, today we will declare with one voice, that Wave will live forever. That we, the citizens of Wave, will always be together and survive. We shall return someday to this land. Now, let us sail towards hope. Towards the future. A cheer rose up from the ships, and with a creak of wood and steel, they set sail towards the horizon one by one. Naruto watched them go with a smile on his face. He glanced at Inari, who stood next to him watching them sail. Did you want to go with them? Inari shook his head. My home is Tengaku now. My team is my family. Naruto smiled and turned. He gave a signal, and a flare went up. The flare was the signal for the front guard, the 3 former mercenaries and the Tengaku forces on the front line keeping any advanced scouts at bay. Jiraiya released the illusion he had cast to hide the departing ships, and a shout went up amongst the invading forces. In a flash the Tengaku group was on the land side of the bridge. Naruto nodded at Sakura. She tightened her fist and dug her toes into the ground. With a burst of strength, she launched high into the air. Tsunade watched on approvingly. Sakura gathered all her chakra and strength into her right fist and came down in a tremendous punch on the piece of land where the bridge met the island. The impact was catastrophic. The bridge rolled like a whip that had been cracked before shattering into chunks of concrete and steel. The shockwave threw a blast of dust and pebbles back at the Tengaku defenders. They did not budge. That'll do for now, Jiraiya said. They turned to get onto the Daedalus that they'd prepared. Even Kiba got on one with only a small growl. Calamity patted his forearm and sat behind him with a broad smile. One by one they clambered on board the devices. Sakura turned to Naruto, who stared across the crumbled bridge into the forest. The amassed forces on the other side were attempting to cross using the stones from the destroyed bridge. He looked up at the sky and at his friends on board their Daedalus. He directed the wind to get stronger and pointed at the devices. With a rush they took off, startling their passengers. Naruto! What are you doing? Shikamaru shouted down at him, hanging on for dear life. The Daedalus rose higher and higher, racing towards the windstream that would take them home. I'm buying us time to escape. He turned to face the oncoming horde and said quietly to himself, I won't kill anyone. An advance guard of 7 ninja raced towards Naruto. His white jacket flapping in the breeze, he stepped into his toad taijutsu patterns. Grabbed one leg coming for his face, kicked the person to the left in his head. Spin around, swipe the stabilizing leg of the person who'd attacked first. His fists and elbows were a blur as he pushed forward into the group. One by one they fell groaning or unconscious to the floor. A fireball raced towards him. He didn't see it. He felt the disruption and heat in the air. He thought about it, and the blast veered away and exploded on a rooftop away from him. Naruto felt like he'd broken through a barrier. He felt everything around him. He could see the chakra energies flowing in the wind. He allowed it to flow through him. His iris became rectangular slits and shadowed as he effortlessly entered Sage mode. With another flap of wind and his cloak, he floated into the air, lifting off the ground. Is Naruto flying? Hinata asked no one in particular. As they joined the wind stream and flew away, they watched as Naruto rose above the land. More and more enemy ninja and creations poured onto the island. Naruto knew he could wipe out a huge chunk of this invading army. He should, right here and now. Save a life later, by taking some lives now. But he struggled with the guilt of what he did in Blood Country. He watched as ninja went from house to house making sure no one was left in the village. This is ridiculous, the fox said in his head. Your so-called mercy means hundreds or thousands of innocent humans will be slaughtered in front of that army. I can't be the one to decide if they live or die. Naruto shook his head and replied. Well, how about those creations from that Sannin Orochimaru? They're not human. The fox growled, his bloodlust surging. Let's kill those. Naruto frowned, finding no reason to argue that point. Besides, he had some anger to work out. Seeing the country of Wave overrun was another nail in the coffin of his childhood memories. Fine. With a yelp of glee, the fox pushed his chakra further into Naruto. His yes changed from rectangular shape to crosses. His whisker-like birthmarks grew deeper and more pronounced. Naruto managed to keep his head though, and held his hands out, palm up. A single tiny Rasengan appeared. Then another. And another. The Rasengans rotated around each other. Naruto kept adding more miniature Rasengans into the swirling vortex above his hands. He glanced down below and directed each ball to a target at a rapid rate. The fox's chakra adding more destruction to the attacks. The creations of Orochimaru exploded one by one. The chaos that ensued as the army below realized death was raining down from above was something to see. People trampled each other to get under shelter. Some fired back with fireballs or earth jutsu. But Naruto just rose higher into the air and kept up the barrage. Each Rasengan finding its intended target even if they moved. After a solid minute of his assault, and an innumerable amount of Rasengans, Naruto lowered his arms. Chaos reigned below. At some point some buildings had caught fire. Naruto remembered some of the Nin used fire jutsu, so one of them must have started it. Fitting, he thought. The village could burn down. He glanced away to see and saw the ships on the horizon. But the village still lives on in them. He looked up at his Konoha friends and Tengaku family flying away in the jet stream. And in us. Konoha will live again for them. Naruto flew up into the stream himself, caught it, and raced after his friends. With a quick hurration in midair, something he had never tried before, he blinked and was sitting in the Daedalus with a huge grin. Let's head home, he shouted over the wind. The ashes of Wave blew in the other direction, out to sea, following its former citizens on their journey.